Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those connecting virtually. I just was told by the team we have more than 400 virtual connection with us today. So I'm honored to moderate the opening session of the Vienna Food Safety Forum, and I would like to invite Mr. Gerd Muller, the Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organizations, to open the Vienna Food Safety Forum.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and experts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome here in the International Center. On behalf of UNIDO, I'm very pleased to greet you at the Vienna Food Safety Forum. Our guest from Australia just arrived after 35 hours flight, more or less. I want especially to thank the government of Australia and the Standards and Trade Development Facility hosted by the WTO to co-organize this event with us. And welcome all of you, the speaker of today, distinguished delegates worldwide. Regulators and the private sector are coming together to improve food safety outcomes for public health and trade. We urgently need to transform our global food system to sustainability, feed nearly 10 billion people by 2050. That is the challenge of the future. We are still facing the ongoing impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and it's not over. Climate change and conflicts around the world, war in the Ukraine, with dramatic consequences, especially for the poorest. Yet, more and more people go to bed hungry. We have the worst food crisis since 2008. That's the reality. Nevertheless, I say that a world without hunger is possible. We are realistic and we are optimistic. It is possible. We are at a crossroad. Now is the decade for action. Words must be followed by concrete actions. That was my message at the G20 in Indonesia, G20 meeting with the ministers in Indonesia last week. We don't need much more research, papers and speeches. We need concrete actions, especially from the industrialized countries, from the rich countries in the world. In the past, we saw success. Between 1990 and 2015, the number of people growing hungry was reduced from 1.2 billion to 700 million. That was a great success. Today, hunger and poverty are on the rise again. Around 800 million people globally suffer from chronic hunger, and over 160 million children suffer from malnutrition. And until 2050, because of the population growth, the demand for food will rise by 50% until 2050. From now until 2050, the demand for food will rise by 50%. So what is needed? First, we need a more global solidarity from Australia till America. We need a more global solidarity and a stronger commitment from the rich and industrialized countries. I just got back from the Philippines. I spoke there to bananas farmers. That's the reality. They need a much more fair price for their products. And that is not only in the Philippines. Fair supply chains and local added value, not only for farmers in the Philippines, also in Africa. I think about the coffee farmers in Latin America, for coffee, cocoa, cotton. We need a new approach in globalization. Yes, rethink globalization. Because now we have a situation, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. That is the situation. And we are a UN organization. We are the voice of the poorest and the poor in the world. Second, sustainable agriculture requires investments in technology, in training, in electricity, in digitalization. Modern agriculture can double or tenfold yields, especially in African countries. I have some experience in this field as a former German minister. We can double or tenfold yields. Food safety is a public good. Digitalization and data-driven innovation is a big chance. So we know what to do. We have the knowledge, we have the technologies to end hunger and poverty. UNIDO is already helping its member states. And that is something very important, and for me, very important priority of our support in our organization. UNIDO is the UN platform for implementation, projects, transfer, and cooperation between industrialized countries and developing countries. UNIDO stands ready to serve as a global facilitator in helping countries in their economic transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director General Muller. Indeed, partnerships are vital to achieving our goals for a more food secure future. We are very pleased to partner with the Government of Australia in the organization of this forum. With this, I would like to invite Ms. Nicola Hinder, Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, please. I would like to mention French and Spanish interpretation is available in the room for those who need it.
Good morning or good afternoon, colleagues, as the case may be for those joining us online. Your Excellencies, honourable guests, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and more importantly, friends. Good morning. It's great to be here in Vienna, and I'm very honoured to be part of this forum with you. As introduced, my name is Nicola Hinder. I'm the Deputy Secretary responsible for agricultural trade in the Australian Government Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. And to my great honour as well, I'm also Chairperson of the Codex Committee on Food Import and Export Inspection and Certification Systems. So it's a great delight to be joining you here today. It's always good to be able to meet face-to-face to discuss these important issues, particularly after the traumatic and long last 2 years that we've all shared. Thank you as well to everyone that's joining us online today. I understand that time zones will be difficult for some, but we're grateful that you're making the effort and that you see that this is such an important event that you're choosing to attend. On behalf of the Australian Government, I'd also like to pass on thanks to the Standards and Trade Development Facility and the United Nations Industrial Development Organisation for their organisation, effort and commitment to making this event happen. We're all here today to talk about innovation and new approaches to food safety. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from all around the room about your experiences and the work that you have underway to take us into the next era of food safety practices. We have a great mix at this forum. We've got government regulators, industry, standard setting bodies, all of which will make for great discussion. So I encourage everyone, both online and in person, to ask questions of us all, share your opinions where you can, and help make this forum as interactive as possible. The key themes of the forum are VTPA, electronic certification, and remote audit and verification, all areas of innovation and approaches that Australia both welcomes and is also helping to drive the adoption as best practice as far and as fast as we can. In that vein, I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a very brief update on Australia's experiences with e-certification and also the progress of Codex guidelines being developed on remote audit and verification. COVID-19 not only changed our lives at home, but it also changed the way that we trade. And one area that Australia has seen a significant interest and uptake occur. Since March 2020, the Australian government has now signed 36 countries to take the step to fully paperless certification through e-certification across a variety of our agricultural products. We have another 8 countries that we're in active negotiations with. And this increase in interest is one of the key reasons that the Australian and the Netherlands delegates worked so hard in CC Fix to the development of paperless certification guidance. And I know that Steve is going to touch on this shortly. While the growth we are seeing with eCert is great progress, we continue to look for the opportunities to further expand it and help ensure that paperless certification is not a dream, but a reality that we all share. For about remote certification and verification, for those that don't know, CC Fix 25, the committee recommended consideration of new work to develop guidance to provide support to competent authorities in the consistent uptake, application and use of information communications technology, as well as emerging technologies in our animal health and plant health audits, all of which are key to food safety. An electronic working group has been formed, co-chaired by Canada, Singapore and Australia, and it's been formed under CC Fix so that we can design and shape how this guidance should work. An electronic working group has developed and now circulated a discussion paper and proposal for all new work to CC Fix members, and that was done by circular letter on the 9th of September through the Codex Secretariat. Good morning, Tom. Seeking any final comments by the 14th of October, 2022. And once comments are received and collated, the new work proposal will come forward to the Codex Executive Committee for approval in November. That does sound like there's a lot of process and bureaucracy that underpins it, but I can assure you it's remarkably streamlined. And I thank everyone that's involved in the process so far for their contributions. It has been absolutely fantastic to see the interest and the level of engagement of so many different parties through the process. And once again, on behalf of the Australian government, thanks again for your attention. And I look forward to speaking with many of you over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hendel, for your opening statement, and we look forward to continue and expand our cooperation. UNIDO and Australia are both members of the Standards and Trade Development Facility, the STDF, hosted by WTO. STDF has been a long-standing partner for UNIDO, and we are pleased to have their support in organizing this event. We would like hereby share with you a video message from Mr. Jean-Marie Boucam, the Deputy Director General of the WTO.
Warm greetings from the World Trade Organization to everyone here today in person and delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Warm greetings from the World Trade Organization to everyone here today, in person and virtually, at the second Vienna Food Safety Forum. This event comes at a time where the global food system is rapidly changing, fueled by geopolitical, public health, and environmental concerns. Trade is part of the solution to those challenges, from pandemics to climate change and food shortages. In this new context, I'm happy to report that during our 12th Ministerial Conference last June, our members have undertaken discussions to improve the implementation of the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Declaration. Over the next 2 days, you will share data-driven, digital solutions to strengthen food safety for improved health and trade facilitation, contributing to the UN's 2030 agenda. Key findings from your discussions will be directly relevant for the WTO work within the SPS committee. Data-driven innovations in the SPS areas are key. They help to reduce costs, speed up processes and build trust. The use of remote inspections, voluntary third-party assurance programs, and e-certificate is already making a difference, especially in developing countries. For example, about 70 countries are actively exchanging electronic phytosanitary certificates, or e-phytos, averaging 100,000 exchanges per month. We can build on the experience and lesson learned through the STDF e-phyto project to promote e-food safety and veterinary certification. Allow me to highlight 2 areas that I see as a foundation for future work to ensure safe food trade. First, meeting international standards. By promoting Codex, WOAH and IPPC standards, women and men farmers, producers and small business owners can gain access to regional and international markets. Small-scale producers often lack the knowledge and resources to meet standards, so invest in building their capacity to facilitate safe and inclusive trade. Secondly, strengthening public-private partnerships. Government and industries must work together to find innovative solutions to improve food safety outcomes. The pandemic taught us that we need to strengthen SPS capacity as a global public good, and we can do this only through partnerships. The result will benefit us all. Economic recovery and resilience against future foodborne outbreaks and outbreaks of plant pests and animal diseases. This is also where the Standards and Trade Development Facility, or STDF, comes in. The STDF is a global partnership that facilitates safe trade to benefit people in developing countries. Housed in the WTO, we are all proud of the concrete results achieved by the STDF Global Partnership. For example, regional projects in West and East Africa, in Central America, are testing how food safety authorities can use data to risk profile food businesses, improve inspection and effectively use scarce resources. The combination of strong partnership, use of good practices, data and innovation, learning and sharing is driving SPS improvement to facilitate safe trade. As I conclude these remarks, I would like to thank UNIDO and Australia for partnering on this event, for your valuable support to developing countries. We are all working toward the same goal: safe, sustainable, and inclusive trade of food and agricultural products. We are better together, and that is precisely the value of the STDF's global partnership. Let's coordinate actions, collaborate on projects, and learn from each other. Thank you. I wish you all fruitful discussions.
WTO recognized the Codex Alimentarius as the relevant standard-setting organization for food safety standards and the main reference for its SPS agreement. With this, we are pleased to have with us today the chairperson of the Codex Alimentarius Commission, Mr. Steve Werner, and I'm pleased to invite him for delivering his remarks.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Director General of UNIDO, Dr. Gerd Miller, Deputy Director General of IEA, Dr. Najat Mokhtar, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends. It's an honour to be in this company and to be able to address you briefly at the opening of this Vienna Food Safety Forum. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the fantastic work of our hosts and organisers, UNIDO, STDF and the Government of Australia in convening this forum. And a hello from me to everyone joining us virtually this week. The virtual working environment we've all adapted to over the past 2 years or so has allowed greater levels of participation, enhanced collaboration and inclusion, benefits which we must now retain and consolidate. So it's great that this is a hybrid conference open to all. Hello too to everyone joining here in person in Vienna in this conference hall. And it's great to be back, as it were, able to nurture, renew and grow the personal and professional relationships and exploit opportunities for informal discussion as we seek to harness the power of data and digital innovation in food control. Because these innovations and the technology that supports them are increasingly low cost and accessible. So it's timely to think about how we might share our experiences and build good practice. Time too, to think about where guidelines, codes of practice and other tools might drive international standardization, improve consumer protection, and also facilitate trade. And that's where Codex, the UN food standard setting body, can come in, harnessing the insights and technical expertise of this community to develop globally accepted standards. And that work, as we've already heard, is undertaken by one Codex committee in particular, the Codex Committee on Food Import and Export Inspection and Certification Systems, or CCFIX for short, hosted by our co-sponsor this week, the Government of Australia, and chaired by my fellow panelist this morning, Nicola Hinder. And the work of this committee includes development of texts relating to the establishment and modernisation of national food control systems. And it's no coincidence that the issues we're discussing here this week, including remote and virtual audit and certification and use of data from voluntary third-party assurance, are issues on which that committee has texts at various stages of development. And I'd like to touch briefly, as Nicola foresaw, on another of these issues, electronic certification. As for me, it's been one of Codex's recent wins, and you'll hear far more about e-certification during this forum. So Codex had its first discussion on electronic certification at CCFIX 21, and at CCFIX 23, work started in earnest to update Codex guidance on certificates to include electronic and paperless certification. We identified that new technologies were going to be key for the future, even before COVID, that was in our minds. And we identified that electronic certification had the potential to streamline trade, to ease administration at the border, and to mitigate supply chain issues. Those benefits now are more important than ever for us to realise as our world is forever changed by COVID-19. And following excellent collaboration by the members of our CCFIX community, the 44th session of the Codex Alimentarius Commission adopted changes to the guidelines for design, production, issuance and use of generic official certificates to include key information on how to implement paperless certification and important considerations for member countries as they manage the sometimes difficult transition to paperless certification. A win for all, I'd say, and a clear demonstration of why engagement in Codex benefits all. And you've already heard from Nicola how the Government of Australia has used this standard in realising some of its benefits in trade. Turning now to this week, this forum provides us with an unparalleled opportunity to learn from these and other experiences that between us we have in developing and applying data and digital approaches, and to establish and renew important cross-sectoral partnerships too. Since my election as chairperson of the Codex Alimentarius Commission last year, I've been keen to promote the view, which I share, that the work of Codex isn't done when the ink is dry on a new international standard. In many ways, this is where the hard work starts. if we are to develop impact, deliver impact through the recognition and use of Codex standards, we must also invest effort in their implementation. And so I'd like to acknowledge the work of our co-sponsors, UNIDO and STDF in particular in this regard, particularly here in respect of supporting the piloting and implementation of voluntary third-party assurance approaches, including those in Central America, in East and West Africa, and in the Middle East and North Africa. And for me, this exemplifies our shared endeavour across organisations, across sectors, and across regions. And we should, of course, continue this work collaboratively and inclusively in this forum, in the work of Codex and beyond. We should all participate as we all have a stake. We should all have a voice, and we all need to take ownership of meeting shared challenges, exploiting shared opportunities. So let's set priorities for new work together. Let's share and harness the knowledge and insights that we have, and let's work together on delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, and we wish you a great success as a chair of Codex. And let me take this opportunity on behalf of UNIDO to really thank you for the cooperation over the last few years in your other capacity at the Food Standards Agency of the United Kingdom. Thank you. Creating market access is one of UNIDO's key programs in support of the Kingdom of Cambodia. In partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, UNIDO is implementing a large-scale program named CAPFISH. Pleased to have with us today His Excellency Minister Weng. May I ask Your Excellency to share with us your remarks?
Excellency Gerd Müller, Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to be here at the opening ceremony of the Vienna Food Safety Forum. On behalf of the government of Cambodia, especially the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the UNIDO for its contribution to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal, while delivering on the mandate to support Cambodia in achieving inclusive and sustainable industrial development. For the past 2 decades, Cambodia has sustained an average annual GDP growth of over 7%, and agriculture is one of the main drivers. However, with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, our growth has substantially reduced to 3% in 2021. The share of agriculture is in GDP was 22.1%, and which crop contribute 13%, fishery 5.5%, livestock 2.6%, and forestry 1.6%. Agro-food industry play a very important role in accelerating economic growth and agriculture development in Cambodia. It's the vital instrument linking our farmer, producer, and consumer. Unfortunately, achieving of effective and efficient agro-food industry is not at all straightforward, especially for the developing country like Cambodia. We still face several constraints, such as the limited of the processing facility, access to modern technology, machinery, transportation, logistics, infrastructure, and more importantly, public awareness on food safety, standard requirement, and SPS. related issue. Responding to this about challenges, the Royal Government of Cambodia has taken full value chain approach through the modernization of the agriculture sector, providing favorable incentive in investment in agriculture, agro-processing, and post-harvest by considering the food safety and international market requirement. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take stock on improper use of agrochemical by working closely with the relevant stakeholders to identify best practices and proven programs to reduce the use of harmful chemical. It is required to promote the scaling up of climate smart agriculture practices and environmentally friendly pest management through sharing knowledge and best practices to enhance climate resilient agriculture and improve agri-food production system. Regarding addressing food safety standard requirement in Cambodia, it has been constantly improved through the exchange of information and food data, such as the use of blockchain technology with QR code implementation of good agricultural practice, phytosanitary certificate, mobile application on the safe use of the pesticide, and digital monitoring, inspection, and traceability system in fishery products. As the world is facing very diverse issues and even more complex situation in agricultural development and food trade worldwide, we should support each other to promote sustainable food production, extend economic and trade cooperation, remove trade barrier, and continue to strengthen cooperation in the field of science, digitalization, advanced technology, and education in agriculture, particularly to the less developed country. All this will surely have to maintain the steady development of sustainable agriculture, enhance the resilience of agriculture supply chain, and ensure food safety and food security domestically and internationally. To conclude, please allow me to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude once again to UNIDO and our development partner for your contribution to the development of Cambodia. I wish you a very successful forum and fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your warm remarks and more importantly, for your continuous support to UNIDO. UNIDO is also partnering with the government of Ethiopia on a number of large-scale initiatives, including the flagship initiative on the integrated agro-industrial parks. Pleased to invite His Excellency State Minister Kafini to share his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellency Greg Miller, UNIDO Director General, distinguished delegate guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Ministry of Trade and Regional Integration, myself, I would like to seize this opportunity to thank UNIDO for inviting us to participate in the 2022 Vienna Food Safety Forum and to reflect on long-lasting relationship between UNIDO and the government of Ethiopia. It is to be recalled that UNIDO has been actively involved in Ethiopia since in 1968, with nearly 300 projects covering a wide range of technical assistance intervention in priority sector, such as agro-industry, leather and textile, through the capacity building and institutional reform. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Ethiopia is revisiting its industrial policy and strategy as a crucial juncture in the country's development. The homegrown economy reform agenda identifies the manufacturing sector as one of the 5 key pillars, and Ethiopia 10 years development plan aims from the sector contribution to the GDP to grow from 6.8% to 17.2%. Within these 10 years, structural transformation of the sector will be a focus, with export performance expected to increase from 13.2% in 2021 to 48.4% by 2029-30, also bringing about a shift in labor force participation from agriculture to industry. Despite these targets, the manufacturing sector growth rate and contribution to the national economy is at a minimal level, which demands a new approach. To become a beacon of African prosperity, Ethiopia's manufacturing sector contribution to the GDP must be enhanced, and its capacity to substitute import of strategic products, to enhance foreign exchange earning, and to create jobs must be unleashed. This can only be done through collective leadership that creates a conducive environment for the sector, which is being undertaken in collaboration with UNIDO technical assistance. Currently, the government of Ethiopia is working closely with UNIDO regional hub office in 3 light manufacturing sector, agro-food processing, textile and apparels, and leather products. These sectors were chosen due to their perspective for job creation, strong linkage to the agricultural sector, high export potential, and capacities to attract private sector investment. They will act as springboard for the transformation of Ethiopian economy from one based on agriculture to one driven primarily by light industries. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my country presents its compliment to UNIDO and has the honor to extend its appreciation for continued support from inception to the implementation of the pilot integrated agro-industrial parks. I would like to convey our highest appreciation of the technical assistance work undertaken by UNIDO in design and implementation of industrial agro projects. We have the conviction that the development of integrated agro-industrial parks in Ethiopia is noble and valuable for the socio-economic transformation of Ethiopia, which could transform raw agricultural product export by adding values and standardizing quality products for global market. It can also create incentives for the adoption of high quality inputs and best agronomy practices and opportunities for increased farm earning and the creation of new sustainable jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, another important milestone in which the country is in partnership with UNIDO is enhancing the capacity of food safety and quality assurance institutions. The Vienna Food Safety Forum gives the stakeholders from competent authority, industry, the service sector, and academia the chance to explore the most recent development in data-driven food safety innovation. Furthermore, the forum will focus on solutions for remote audit and verification, electronic health certificates, and the data generated by voluntary third-party assurance program. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our efforts are geared towards ensuring the success of current and future initiatives of the economic growth and development of Ethiopia. With this strong opportunity, we will continue to learn lessons to progress our efforts. On behalf of government of Ethiopia, I extend my congratulations on our collaboration for the last decades and strong accomplishment achieved, and I anticipate the opportunity continue to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. UNIDO is closely collaborating with the International Atomic Energy Agency on a number of areas, including food safety. We're delighted to have with us today Ms. Mukhtar, Deputy Director General, to tell us about this collaboration.
Thank you. Director General, Mr. Muller, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to join you at the opening of this important event, the Vienna Food Safety Forum 2022. I'm also bringing you wishes for a successful forum from the IAEA Director General, Rafael Mariano Grossi. Food safety is a cornerstone of food security. Throughout the world, countries face many challenges in ensuring a sustainable food supply, enough food that is safe and nutritious for a world-growing population. There are many critical points along the food supply chain where food safety can be compromised. We at the IAEA look at the big picture from farm to fork, all the way from production to consumers. Through science and innovation, the IAEA contributes directly to enhancing food safety, especially in developing member states. We do this through our joint FAO-IAEA Center of Nuclear Techniques in Food and Agriculture. The center was established with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations exactly 58 years this week. It's a great example of one house approach under the UN umbrella. The Joint Center is based here at the IAEA headquarters and has a state-of-the-art research and innovation and training laboratories in Seversdorf, just 35 kilometers south of Vienna. You are welcome to visit. The Joint Center makes use of the advantage of nuclear technologies along with complementary techniques to support member states' institutions. We help them increase their capabilities in testing foods to detect and control food hazards. Research and development activities of our agriculture and biotechnology laboratories are unique feature of the Joint Center. They are demand-driven and problem-oriented. We focus on developing technologies for member states in response to real and practical needs. The innovation have an impact on the entire supply chain from again, farmers and producers to consumers. The focus of our work is on testing methods to support system for the control of chemical residues and contaminants in food, foodborne pathogens, and food authenticity testing to combat the ever-growing threats of food fraud. We contribute to developing of international standards and guidelines through Codex Alimentarius. Another feature of our work is food radiation, providing a small and safe dose of radiation to produced foods. It's really a huge boost to the economies of exporting countries. Thinking of Africa, that's 50% of the harvest is lost. I strongly believe that this is a solution to food safety in Africa, DG. Thank you. As it makes it possible for food products to stay fresh, stay safe, and last the journey without spreading invasive organisms. Globally, the volume of commodities irradiated for food for phytosanitation has increased significantly to nearly 100,000 tons per year. For example, this technology has helped Thailand to export safe poultry products and Mexico to export fruits. Another technology is the use of fruit fly technique, a very friendly and environment-friendly technology that helped many farmers, hundreds of farmers in Africa and Latin America to have safe harvest and could export their product abroad. There is also a recent focus on emergency preparedness and response, not only for radiological incidents affecting food and agriculture, but also to food safety, incident, and crisis. Another unique aspect of our work is the provision of research and innovation and network platforms, coordinated research projects, laboratory networks, IAEA collaborating centers help disseminate and share innovation of the IAEA FAO centers and labs to all institutions over the world. Over 400 national research institutions and experiment stations in member states cooperate in our projects and networks. Of course, we don't do this on our own. We collaborate with many research institutions, government bodies, NGOs, and international organizations, and work throughout public and private partnership as well. We have a very good working relationship with colleagues at UNIDO, but given both organizations strong focus on helping countries reach their development goals, and both organizations with solid technical cooperation projects in the field, and also taking into account that we are living in very unpredictable moments, climate change, food insecurity, water insecurity, I think we are better together to serve our member states. Ladies and gentlemen, a number of my staff will participate in this forum, and I look forward to hearing about your discussions, conclusions, and outcomes, and I wish you a very successful event, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mukhtar, and we look forward for our partnership. I think with this, we are concluding the opening session, and may I ask Your Excellencies to stand for a photo for all the speakers, if you could stand up, and then we will break for a networking coffee break outside this building immediately. Eva, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Ilya Sagnau, and I will be the host of the Vienna Food Safety Forum for the next 3 days. We're going to start the first session in the next couple of minutes. I would like to inform everyone that we have an application called Swap Card that you can use to access the agenda, and you can also use it to have networking opportunities with other participants of the forum. So, I'd like to kindly ask the speakers and the moderator if they are ready to start the session. Okay, perfect. So, I would like to welcome everyone in the first session of the Vienna Food Safety Forum, which is focusing on the use of voluntary third-party assurance approach. This session will be around 90 minutes long. For those joining remotely, I'll kindly ask you to drop your questions on the chat, and then we will take them and share them with the moderator later on. Talking about moderator, I have the honor to introduce you to Mr. Tom Hyland, who is the Secretary of the Codex Alimentarius Commission and your moderator of this session. Mr. Hyland, I would be very thankful if you could kindly present the speaker of this session and the topic itself. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I will start with the topic. And does anybody have a hammer? Ah, great, it's up there. Good. So in this session, we're going to explore how different stakeholders collaborated and benefited from VTBA approach, and what are the essential elements which need to be considered in its successful application. And we do this in the context of the recently adopted, well, almost 1 year, Codex guidelines. We have government experts, retailers, scheme owners. Anybody else? Any category I missed? No. And international organizations. Yes, of course. So Nicola Hinder, in the opening session, the chairperson of the CCFIX, our committee that developed these guidelines, has already explained a bit about the work of CCFIX. And I thought I need to say a little bit more about that. It's the committee with the longest name, and that over the last 30 years developed an impressive collection of texts that build on each other. So they're all linked and make reference to each other. So to give guidance to countries how international food trade can happen safely and efficiently. In fact, the first session was held almost exactly 30 years ago. So happy birthday, happy 30th birthday, CCFIX. And Australia has successfully moved that work forward all this time, supported the Codex Secretariat on this work, both financially and with their know-how. So I expect lots more useful text to come out of this committee. And today we concentrate on the VTBA. Food business operators have the obligation to manage food safety of their products and for complying with the regulatory requirements relating to the food. And the competent authorities obviously require the food business operators to demonstrate that. Many food business operators use quality assurance systems, including voluntary third-party assurance, VTBA programs to reduce supply chain risks and confirm food safety outcomes. And the Codex principles and guidelines for national food control systems that we adopted some years back foresee competent authorities taking into account quality assurance systems in their national food control system. So the guidelines that we adopted last year make reference to this, and they elaborate on that more. They provide a framework and criteria for assessing the integrity and credibility of the government's structures of the VTBA programs and the reliability and information of the information data generated by such programs to support the national food control system objectives. As our chairperson, Steve, has said also in the opening session, I see this forum really contributing to our strategic plan to increase impact through the recognition and use of Codex standards. So I would like to thank the STDF and UNIDO for preparing this meeting. Now, I'm joined here at the head table by a great collection of individuals, and I'm going to introduce them in which order? Well, ladies first. So on my left, second left here, we have Delilah Ayala, Technical Director of the SPS and Inquiry Point in Belize. And I'm really happy to have you here. And this is the first time we meet after the pandemic. And I hope you remain as active in food safety and Codex as you've been over the last many years actually already. So I have to admit a little bit of international ignorance from my part, because I almost made the mistake of speaking Spanish to her because she's coming from South America. But then I thought something is wrong. So I checked if my feeling was right. Yes, it's English speaking actually, and many other languages you speak over there. Languages are always a mystery. Marlene Hopper, Deputy Head SDF, World Trade Organization. Marlene, we've known each other for many years, and I will talk about a non-mystery in your life. You were at FAO, and then you left for SDDF and WTO, maybe not in that order. It's not a mystery because, you know, everybody knows I always preferred Geneva to Rome. And I find WTO is a super interesting organization. And the SDF, which I had the honor to chair, working group last year. It's a very amazing partnership, assisting countries to fulfill their SPS obligations, and among these Codex standards. So SCDF is also directly contributing to our strategic plan. So welcome, Martin. Philippa Wiltshire, Head of Operation Red Tractor Scheme, United Kingdom. By now you wonder what's the mystery about you. In any case, schemes like yours are the essence of the Codex guidelines. So I'm looking forward to hear more about how that works, and if, as I hope, you think our guidelines are useful to all actors, including you. And if there's any mystery here, then why you call it Red Tractor? But you can you can tell us that later. Ali, but I'm going to ask you a question as well, right? I think. And you're the chief of the Sustainable Food Systems Division, leading a team of professionals here at UNIDO. And I have one mystery with you that I can't remember when we last met. And did we meet physically or not? I just met Erika Stewart from GFSI for the first time physically, and I could have bet we met physically before. So my mind is going. Anyway, looking forward to hearing from you a bit later. Gabriel Hanne, Director, Quality Assurance Metro Group, Germany. Now, retailers are obviously important in ensuring that we have food on our tables. And even when the times are tough, like over the last 2 years. And to stay with mysterious, I'm reminded that as a child, I always looked at the big metro markets and asked my mom, can we go in there? But she explained, no, only people with special cards can go in there. So, of course, now I know that you're not mysterious, but what you do will come, Gabriel. Mike O'Neill, Head of Codex Policy and Strategy at the United Kingdom Food Standards Agency. There's many things I could say about Mike. The UK and its inhabitants have always been a mystery to me, which is probably why I love going there so much. He's a great supporter of Codex and knows especially the CC6 work much better than I do. Welcome, Mike. And last but not least, Head of Unit 114, Monitoring Strategy Coordination, Federal Office of Consumer Protection and Food Safety Department, Food Safety Germany, representing the main target group of the Codex guidelines. And I'm interested to learn from him what he thinks about them. 114 sounds mysterious, but I'm German too, so I know that we have a thing for numbering everything. Willkommen, Peter. So thanks a lot, everyone, for being here. And we start off with Mike. Can you tell us a bit more about the VTPH approach set down in the Codex guidelines? Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everybody. I'm Mike O'Neill. As Tom said, I work for the UK Food Standards Agency. I'd like to start by thanking our host, UNIDO, and the Government of Australia too, but also STDF, who have been instrumental in supporting work on the VTPA approach. The last time I met Tom actually was in London when he took me to see Cinderella. And I'll let people talk to him about that in the margins, perhaps. But on to my presentation. Next slide, please. Should I press some? So an outline of what I want to share with you during this brief presentation. So I will flash up the timeline to adoption, because anybody who works in Codex knows that these things don't happen quickly, and we actually managed to navigate a pandemic in between to hit the deadline. Something around understanding the VTP approach, so what it's about, what it means in practice. A little look at the guidelines themselves, and something I've hopefully managed to put together that moves around the slide, how you navigate those guidelines, and to finish, the growing interest in the approach, which is why we're here today, I guess. So next slide, please. So this is the timeline, and as you'll see, we did use the full range of tools to get these guidelines over the line. And I'd particularly mention the sessions we had alongside the physical meetings where we had presenters from a range of interested parties. So in Chile, we had a physical working group and we had a voluntary third-party assurance scheme owner, a third-party assurance user, the FBO. And then in Scotland, we had our friends, the Red Tractor, their former chief exec, but also the GFSI presented to explain their approach to VTPA and what they do. And then in Australia, our now chair, Steve Wern, provided a presentation on the UK experience of third party and what we've done in particular in animal feed. Alongside that, we had a presentation from OzMeat, a third party assurance scheme in Australia, to really demonstrate the kind of data that the third party assurance schemes have, and when they're willing to share, is of huge value to the regulators. So we did manage to get that one over the line, and it was at the CC-FIX in June 2021. So I should thank Fran Freeman, the previous chair of CC-FIX, because I believe that was her first Codex text that she managed to push through to step 8. So a great success for her. I'm sure she remembers that. And we've adopted the guidelines. They're now a standard. Next slide, please. So this is the approach in a nutshell. It's voluntary, and we can't stress that enough. Rest throughout the working group. Nobody is going to force an authority or a VTPA scheme owner to enter into this kind of arrangement. And that's why the word voluntary probably appears in those guidelines more than any other word, because of that nervousness that people will be forced to take this approach. It is about public-private partnership, but it's underpinned by transparency and these now international Codex guidelines. If you think, why would I do it? It's to support your national food control system. Very simple. The objectives of your national food control system can be supported if you are in receipt of reliable data from the conformity assessments carried out by third-party assurance scheme owners, or the certification bodies, actually. Another important point to note, Tom mentioned the roles and responsibilities. There was a lot of nervousness within the working group that these would change. They absolutely do not change. The FBO remains responsible for producing safe food. The regulator remains responsible for verifying that they are indeed complying with the legal requirements. But clearly, throughout the world, there are many different structures in how official regulatory controls are delivered. So what we see in the guidelines is a fairly flexible set of guidelines that allow the approach to be tailored to your national settings. And in a real nutshell, this is the conformity data that the VTPA owners have. And let's not forget that that data is actually owned by the FBOs. And if and when shared, that can allow the regulator to more accurately risk profile an FBO, and or, as we do in the UK, an entire sector. And with this data, we are then able to better target our regulatory resources. Next slide, please. Okay. Am I able to control this here? Because, yeah, this is going to go. There's the remote. Ah, I've got the remote. There we go. Sorry. So this is just to give you a sense of the structure and what's in those guidelines. The scope, quite clearly, is quite narrow, or not. It's your national food control system. And there are many, many different attributes to a control system. And so what we did, what was important was to narrow that scope. But also in the guidelines, you'll find what's out of scope. So certification bodies that certify to a regulatory standard are out of scope of the Codex guidelines because they are quasi-regulatory bodies and may well be authorized in certain countries to deliver the official controls. Not working. Should I point that way? Sorry. Okay, stop there. All right, we have a set of principles, and quite clearly those principles are horizontal, and I'll highlight one of them, transparency. It's very important that the stakeholders and all of the actors along the supply chain, including your consumers, are aware that such an approach is being taken by the regulator and that this data shared by the VTPA owners is being used for regulatory purposes to adjust inspection frequencies or inspection intensities. And when I say intensity, I mean you may spend less time at an FBO because you are assured of the data from the VTPA owner. We have some definitions, and those definitions are largely drawn from the ISO standards because that's the ecosystem VTPA and the certification bodies operate in. So you'll see ISO 17065 and ISO 17000 key documents in the approach. So we did lift many of those. The roles and responsibilities you've heard me mention, they are key, and it's key that they don't change. It's also key from one of the principles that this is not a burdensome approach. There needs to be some proportionality in the approach. It's not about burdening businesses further with requirements. It's actually about removing and avoiding some of the duplication, which was actually one of the purposes that VTPA schemes were created many, many years ago. So the three key actors here, the competent authority, the VTPA owner, and the food business operator. And can I ask the to push the button again to move us? All right. So the arrows here show a relationship for this approach. So the competent authority, the key relationship here is the VTPA owner. And as you can see, the FBO, it has a relationship with the VTPA owner or the certification program owner. And in the guidelines, the next step is to assess the integrity and credibility of the VTPA program. And that's for the competent authority. And they do it in partnership with the VTPA owner. And that's an important step in the process. And what we are looking for here is to build some confidence in the VTPA scheme and the data that they generate and the certificates that they issue. And the question is that data reliable? And if the outcome of that assessment, and we've done it in the UK and you'll be hearing about that later, if the answer is yes, then you can begin to think about your regulatory approaches. Again, that's the competent authority that's thinking about the regulatory approaches. And in the guidelines, we go a little bit further to expand on that with some of the process considerations and some of the policy options. So in the UK, for example, in order for us to have that confidence, we did some shadow audits of the businesses after the certification body to compare their findings with our findings. So some of these ideas are in the guidelines, and can I say this is, you know, not the Bible. There are other approaches and flexibilities contained within the guidance to tailor that approach to your national settings. One example being the accreditation. So we recognize that it may not always be possible for a VTPA scheme to have an accredited to ISO 17065 by the IAF. And the guidelines actually talk about the IAF, and that may be perhaps the gold standard, but IAF has, I think, about 98 members, and Codex has 188. So we had to build some flexibility in there around that as well. So this is my last slide. We're here because of this growing interest in the approach, and I'm sure we're going to hear some good examples of how others are actually trying to implement or have implemented. So it's not a new idea. We heard it's in the Codex National Food Control System guidelines. I think they date from 2013, but it talks about taking account of where the Codex guidelines move us to is how you might use that data once you've confirmed it's reliable. And the STDF and UNIDO are already funding pilots, and we're really pleased to see some of the countries that are on those pilots here today. The WHO, their new food safety strategy, also recognizes the approach. And I'll mention that there is a WHO briefing under development at the moment to assist countries, and it's targeted at lower middle income countries, and the lead author is actually here, or the lead official in WHO, so I'm very pleased to see her as well. That publication, I believe, is due late October, early November. So I'll finish there. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Mike, and thanks a lot for going into telling about the pains and pleasures of developing a Codex text as well. But I have to say that the CC Fix is definitely one of the committees that is a very well-oiled machine, putting out the text in a very big regularity and not always taking on too much work at once, and then bringing out the text after 3-4 years, which is well within the standard of what we do. Next presentation, now we're going to look at it a little bit more from the point of view of the official controls. So consideration of VTPA in official controls. Peter Wendt from the ministry. What are the different approaches in Europe? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Dear Excellencies, dear delegates, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure being here today and having the opportunity to give this presentation. I would like to follow up Mike's talk a bit, and I would like to present you how we in Europe deal with this topic of the consideration of VTPA and official controls. My name is Peter Wendt from the German Federal Office of Consumer Protection and Food Safety. To acknowledge already at this part of the talk, I'm also a co-chair of the heads of agencies in Europe for the working group of private assurance schemes. So this is a working group of the heads of the European food safety agencies. We are meeting independently from the European Commission. We are an informal working group, and we exchange views and experiences when dealing with the VTPA topic. So I'm also presenting you insights from the European regulators dealing with this topic. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Just a short background from the European perspective here. When we are doing official controls, we have a risk-based approach. So all our controls have to be performed regularly on a risk base. and with appropriate frequency. And to adjust or to define the official control, we are focusing on three major topics, which are the risks associated with the product, basically, then with the operator's past record, and what is important here for this forum, own controls, including private quality schemes, also play an important role. And this is also written down in our European regulatory framework. And it's important because this makes it really relevant for our public-private partnership in Europe. Why is it so important? We want to use existing synergy effects. We want to have a more efficient use of public resources. We would like to have a better targeting of our official controls and the resources for this. And the approaches in the European Union to consider private assurance schemes for the planning of official controls also leads to another important topic, which is not discussed here, but during the forum. We need also a data sharing between the competent authorities and either the scheme owner or the FBO. I will come to this later on. So this is somehow the European perspective on this public-private partnership. And what I would like to do today is to provide you with insights, how the regulators in Europe have taken this topic into their consideration. I would like to present you with two different approaches how the regulators deal with this topic. The first approach is a direct cooperation between the competent authorities and the private assurance schemes. This is well established, I would say, in the UK, in the Netherlands, also in France, Belgium, and it means that the authorities invest resources to assess the private assurance scheme. The authorities accept or recognize then the private assurance scheme. And then the authorities adjust their official controls from certified food business operators. This can be adjustment for the frequency, so less often controlled. Also, the content of the official control can be adjusted, the focus or the intensity. It needs an exchange of information between the authority and the private assurance scheme. And the authorities use, and this is important, with consent of the FBO, the information from the audits from the private assurance scheme. So this is important to mention again. This is one approach with a direct cooperation between the competent authority and the private assurance scheme. And where is an approach one? There's also approach two. Here is the difference. We have an interaction between the competent authority and the food business operator. So not with the private assurance scheme, but the authority interacts directly with the food business operator. This approach is you can find, for instance, in the Scandinavian countries, and also now in some pilots in Germany. I will come to this later on again. Importantly, in this approach too, there is no approval of the private assurance schemes by other authorities, because the competent authorities don't want to invest additional resources, or they don't want to, in their perspective, increase bureaucracy for such an approval. The authorities have a direct contact with the FBO and no interaction with the private assurance scheme owner. The FBO gives authority access to the private assurance scheme results, and the authority then considers this information for the planning of their official controls. FBOs with high compliance with regulatory requirements and the good internal control system, including private assurance scheme, are then rewarded with the lower frequency of inspection by the authorities. So I would just like to summarize at this point. We have, from my perspective and also from the heads of agency working group of private assurance scheme basically two different approaches. One is direct contact between the competent authority and the private assurance scheme. In contrast, approach two, interaction between the competent authority and the food business operator. In the next minutes, I would like to give you some facts on a VTPA pilot in Germany. And what is important for us in Germany is the regulatory background. And you will see that it nicely continues from the codex level via the European regulation, the official control regulation, to our German regulatory framework. At first for Germany in general, but also since Germany is a federal state, we have 16 federal states, and each federal state has its own decree to take this VTPA approach and use it for the planning of official control. So this is a clear, let's say, hierarchy and structure how we deal with the regulatory background, because it is important to have the same regulatory background in all our federal states, because our federal states are responsible for their official controls, and therefore they need their own decrees on this. Just to make it a little bit more practical for you, in this pilot project, the FBO gets a bonus when they follow the VTPA approach. If the assessment of all official control criteria is good and they have a certification, they get a bonus for low-risk establishments. Here, just as an example, all the businesses are risk-based classified. So you will find all your food business operators in a risk class between 1 and 9. Risk class 1 is the food business operator with a high risk. Usually they are controlled at least weekly, and so on and so forth. So the benefit now, or the bonus, is that these FBOs, if they are certified and if they have a good history and record for official controls, they got a diminished risk group by 1, which for instance means for risk class 1, they don't get controlled at least weekly, but now monthly. And for instance, for risk class 5, usually 3 quarterly controlled, they now got controlled on a yearly basis. So this is the bonus with regard to the frequency. In this VTPA pilot in Germany, we have some selection criteria for the third-party assurance systems. We think it's a small set of criteria, but at least the VTPA have to cover the area of control. So, for instance, in the food business, or also for feed, for instance. So the cover of the area has to be covered. Then also the activity, let's say product or process control. We also have requirements for the food business operator. Of course, they need their hazard protocols or GMP, and they also need an ISO certification. And for this project, we also need an accreditation of the VTPA in this certain area. For instance, accreditation by GFSI or by also the ISO system. The period of accreditation should be at least yearly or on a 3-year basis. And we need a data transfer via the FBO directly, or the competent authority is authorized by the FBO to get the data from the private assurance scheme. But what is important for sure, the FBO actively has to say, yes, we want to have these data submitted to the FBO for the planning of the official control, because this is the FBO is a data owner, of course, for these audits. Okay. I think this is the insight I wanted to give you from Europe, also from a pilot in Germany. I really want to acknowledge the group from the heads of agencies which are dealing with the private assurance schemes. Without them, would be not possible to provide you with these insights here. I would also like to acknowledge the work done by Rolf Kamphausen and his colleagues on the German pilot project. And thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. And that was indeed interesting. I already would have lots of questions, but we have to move on. It was interesting to see how they had to do different approaches, which at the first moment seemed very different, but the longer you spoke, I thought, okay, there are then again some commonalities as well. Obviously, there have to be. Let's move a little bit to a different topic, a little more special, to the application and the ongoing pilot initiatives funded by the STDF. So Martin, could you tell us a little bit more about those initiatives? Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. And good morning, everyone here in the room and online. Nice to see so many faces from past work. Well, the STDF is a global partnership to facilitate safe trade based on international standards, including the Codex standards. And it's hosted and housed by the World Trade Organization, the WTO in Geneva, which is where I sit in the STDF Secretariat. But as a global partnership, the STDF involves and works with and engages many other organizations involved in international standards, including FAO, UNIDO, the World Bank, IFC, WHO, and many other organizations, the bilateral donors, and so on. And it's really about funding innovative, collaborative projects to facilitate safe trade and carrying out knowledge work, developing good practices so that more developing countries can benefit from the implementation of international standards, the Codex standards, the IPPC and WOA standards to facilitate safe trade and reap those economic benefits, poverty reduction, and supporting the SDGs and so on. And public-private collaboration has been a key part of STDF's work for many years now. And many STDF projects are based on a public-private collaborative approach on electronic SPS certification, value chain development, remote inspection, and now these new pilots on the use of voluntary third-party assurance programs. And Steve, you talked earlier about the importance of action and collaboration, and we've heard from many of the high-level speakers this morning about the importance of partnerships and collaboration to solve the problems that are facing today's world. And the pilot projects in Central America, in West Africa, and in East Africa are part of this approach to strengthen food safety capacity, looking at new approaches, different ways to do things. And so the pilots in Central America, West Africa, and East Africa are engaging UNIDO, IICA, Land O'Lakes Venture 37 in East Africa to really look at how developing countries could apply the VPTA approach in the new Codex guidelines to improve or to change for more benefits, how they manage food safety systems. And of course, these guidelines and these pilots are just part of a solution. It's not going to change everything, but it's looking at a different way to address one part of the food safety challenge in the countries. And they're based on a changing relationship between the regulators and the private sector at the country level. And it's been great also to see how UNIDO has used the existing pilots also to leverage more support in the Near East region, the Arab region for VPTA pilots too. But it's based on this changing relationship between the regulators and the industry, the private sector, and the opportunities that might come along with that to support more risk-based approaches, to help target resources more effectively, to reduce the regulatory burden and to improve compliance. And Mike spoke about these opportunities, but Mike also mentioned some of the nervousness, some of the concerns, some of the questions that exist. And I think when we do anything differently, there are always challenges, concerns, questions. How might this work in my country? The context is different in developing countries. The resources, the skills, the capacities might be different in the public sector and in the private sector. So the pilots are also directly looking at some of these issues, some of these questions, some of these risks related to accountability, possibility for regulatory capture, issues related to transparency or costs, for MSMEs, for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. So really looking at how might you in practice develop or set up or use this approach in a developing country context where it has not been applied to date, in a way that developing countries can learn, in a way that we can share and exchange these benefits with other countries, drawing also on the Codex structures, the CC Africa, the CC coordinating committees in Latin America. So these pilots are quite innovative, very collaborative, involving a lot of different partners and organizations. And I think they're exciting too, because they're looking at how to leverage, how to connect the different organizations. And Mike, you talked about this growing interest in the VPTA approach. So how to connect and leverage the strengths, the expertise, the resources in a way that more developing countries can potentially benefit in the future, assuming that we are able to show that it works in the developing country context. So I think this is where we are all looking to learn, to understand the experiences from Central America, from West Africa, from East Africa, and from the Arab region as well. So that's what the pilots are about. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Marlon. And now maybe moving to first-hand experience, Delilah, moving to Central America. So as a pilot country, what was your first impression about the approach? Do you have any advice for others who might want to start that approach, using the approach? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Pleasant good morning to everyone, to those online. I don't know if it's morning, good morning, or good evening. Before responding to your question, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this event, the Government of Australia and also UNIDO. And in particular, we also thank those who invited two participants from Belize, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the Standards and Trade Development Facility, and the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. Since through the STDF project, they were able to fund our participation. As you're aware, the pilot project STDF PG 682, piloting the use of voluntary third-party assurance programs to improve food safety outcomes in Central America, has two beneficiaries, Belize and Honduras. With the COVID-19 pandemic affecting implementation, that certainly created a few delays. However, to date, we have implemented a few activities, which, in my view, have been significant for both beneficiary countries in Central America. Belize is a developing country, the only English-speaking country in Central America with a very small population, approximately 405,272 persons, and our economy is reliant mostly on agriculture and tourism. It was important for us to participate in this project because several products are subject to voluntary third-party certification. In Belize, we do not have the presence of certification program owners or third-party certification bodies. Auditors or inspectors of these entities visit the individual exporting companies once these have indicated that they need to comply with specific buyers' certification requirements. Under the pilot project, we have participated in 4 webinars as part of the knowledge sharing component of the project, where the objective is to build awareness among regulators on the different approaches that competent authorities have taken to use information generated from voluntary third-party assurance programs as part of the decision-making process in the food safety management of their national food control systems. Irrespective of the approach, based on what we have listened to, all have used information to make risk-based decisions, and with an emphasis on risk categorization. And so for us, that has been a very important component. So now to try to respond to your question. I believe that this pilot project is affording us the opportunity to test a guideline developed by one of the international standard setting bodies and to share our experience with other members. We recognize that the guideline is not mandatory in nature and offers competent authorities interested in using the approach flexibility in implementation. By participating in this project, we have benefited from experiences and information shared by those competent authorities on the approach they have taken in the application of this guideline in their respective countries. I must stress that the situation in Belize is rather unique. Like many developing countries, we are very limited in resources, and we are grateful that we actually have an opportunity where support is given to actually test a standard. Normally, we just have to be standard takers. Standard is developed, we take it, you can comply or can't comply, and then you only suffer the consequences of trade-related issues. But here we have a guideline that hopefully, if we learn everything that we need to make an informed decision, should actually help us maximize on our limited resources. In my view, this approach, and here I only highlighted 3 critical elements, which I find is very important for us. It requires risk-based decision-making. And you know that risk-based decision-making is also directly impacted by your capacity. 2, it also relies on transparency and requires timely sharing of relevant information. And for there to be any sharing of information, we know that we need then to work on trust. And it also enhances public-private partnership. I believe that it is also important to share that in Belize, in the risk analysis process for import regulation, data generated from third-party assurance programs is already being used in the risk categorization of products. So while we're looking at the guideline, thinking, how can we implement the guideline, we realize that for import regulation, we're actually taking some information already into consideration. And so in my view, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity. And I do know that there is growing interest in this guideline. So my advice to newcomers would be to identify the specific sectors in their country, engage them from now, try to evaluate the entire value chain, do a value chain analysis, and participate in the pilot project with an open mind. And in my view, it's critical to also engage those countries that are in a position to offer mentorship and capacity building. At the end of the day, I believe that it's the national capacity that will dictate which approach is taken, if any. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Delia. And what struck me was really what you said about these guidelines. These guidelines are not forcing something on anyone, but they're assisting countries to make more of their limited resources in order to offer a better food safety outcome for everybody. So that's really, that struck me, and I think that should motivate countries to participate in further initiatives like this. And let me turn over to Ali, as also one of the hosts of these pilot projects. So can you tell us already a little bit about the progress made with this and lessons learned from the VTPA pilots up to now? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And it's great to speak after Delilah, because this is exactly where UNIDO fits, where we come on board to help our member states and developing countries to make use of these guidelines if it's it's relevant to their status. I had some slides to share, but I will save it for the later session. So I will try to summarize for the sake of time 3 different points where UNIDO is trying to do in this exercise. I think the first point, why it matters to UNIDO, because that's also something. There are hundreds and thousands of guidelines coming from the codex and standards. Why this one in particular, UNIDO got excited about it. The second point is, what is our approach? How do we help our member states in this regard? And the third point, what we are offering on the table in terms of capacity development tools. So if I go to the first one, why it matters to UNIDO, simply it's in the heart of our food safety capacity building approach, which we presented many years back at the STDF, where we explained that UNIDO comes with the heart of business-driven food safety capacity. As an industrial development agency, we try to help the industries to take part of any food safety system. So when we learned about the guidelines, it was a great news to us. We see this as a game changer where it will change the way we approach building national food control systems and helping the private sector to be an actual partner. So then we believe this guidelines puts public-private partnership in the right thing. So that's why we are very much excited about it. And that's why when we were approached by SCDF and the partners to take up the challenge and try to do one of the pilots, we did not hesitate. And as Martin mentioned, we contributed with a 3rd pilot in the MENA region. On the second point, our approach, because UNIDO does not set standards, as you know, so we're not actually influencing any of the texts that ended up in the guidelines, but we support our member states. And lately we've been busy since the first webinar we did in the middle of COVID in 2 tracks, I would say. The first one, what we call now the coaching sessions, because that was for us very instrumental and it didn't cost anything. So we called upon the partners who had the experience to have a dialogue, a very open, free, transparent dialogue with other member states. And I would like to thank the partners from the UK, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, those who came on board and spent the time to discuss with other member states and address all the questions, which I can tell you, many are still unanswered. That's we will continue to do. And again, we see that for the newcomers, Delilah, who might join, these sessions are critical because just reading the text and listening to presentations will not take us too far. But these coaching sessions with other member states really prove to be extremely useful. The second track where we are also investing in is capacity building. I think this is very critical. Moving, as Steve mentioned in the morning, moving from the text and the ink into the actual implementation requires a lot. And that's where, at least in the pilots where we manage as UNIDO, we're trying to develop capacity building tools that we put at the disposal of not only the regulators, but also the private sector and any potential scheme owners. And the last point, before I announce some of the tools and the things that we are providing, let me just clarify that we are not actually here to promote and disseminate and market international private schemes in developing countries. That's not our objective. These schemes are out there and the private sector can simply pick and choose and do, and they don't require UNIDO support. We're here to support member states to have their own national, regional capacities, so they can have their own schemes coming from 3rd party or 2nd party or from the FPOs directly. This is where we are targeting our support and capacity building. And with this, we had now recently developed a set of tools will be available for the regulators and for any private third party wishing to establish and develop a scheme. So we'll have soon a model VTPA scheme. So there'll be regulators will have the chance to see a complete scheme. It's not something that is existing in the market. It's just for the sake of training capacity building. So they can see exactly what do we mean by a VTPA, what do we mean by a scheme, and how does it look like? What are the procedures and the documents around? That we think it's useful because we always try to get lost between the standard and the scheme and the guidelines. So that would be a model VTPA that regulators can look at. And the second one is actually an assessment guide. Then whenever any regulator would like to assess this mock scheme or any other available scheme, there are assessment guidelines available for them, which takes the guidelines criteria and more, helping them to look and recognize. And that will be also used in the training and capacity building on the mock scheme in the coming weeks and months. And the last one is the training course that we developed to train assessors at the regulators, because as we look in the future, the regulators need to build their capacity on how to assess. So they need assessors. And we have now a training program that takes them to be hopefully qualified assessors for these schemes. And the last point is what we call the ABCs of a scheme. This is mainly for the private sector industry associations who are willing to take up the challenge and develop a scheme. They need to know the ABCs and how to design a scheme, how to develop a scheme, how to develop a scheme that is already in compliance with the criteria. So when it comes to the assessment by the regulator, it's almost there. So these are the kind of tools we are putting at disposal, not only within the pilots, it's available for all member states and partners. And lastly, on the lessons learned, the nervousness is still there. Still, people are nervous about it. Every time we do a session, a webinar, still they are nervous about it, which is good. Still, it's also the question about capacities. That's why we're investing more about the capacity building. And the last thing, data and data and data, where I think this will continue to be the topic for the coming years to look at. We don't have magic and answers for this, but I think we have to add this as we move. So that's in a nutshell where UNIDO comes into this whole story. And again, thank you for all those, with no difference, all of you on the stage and all here, they have contributed to these pilots in a very nice way. And I close by what Marlene mentioned, that we are building on existing capacities and expertise. So most of you have already know-how and expertise, and you're welcome to share this under our partnership platform that we created for anybody interested to join in and provide and contribute to this journey. Thank you so much. Now.
Thanks very much, Ali. And this is also a learning experience for me about what the different actors are doing. And I think I very much like the coaching approach, because it's not one size fits all, right? And it's good for countries to learn about what others have done in order then to choose their own approach. Now, moving towards, I almost want to say that the victims. No, it's not the victims, but well, the retailers, right? My question is, as a retailer, Gabriel, what is your opinion of this approach? Well, where do you see, maybe let's start with the benefits, but then also do you see problems with the data being shared or other challenges and concerns? Over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm very happy to answer these questions. First of all, I don't see problems, but I see some challenges. I will elaborate on them a little bit. So in principle, I find the concept of the voluntary third-party assurance is a very interesting approach. I think it has potential to add value to the current food safety system. In particular, I do believe if you do it right, it can contribute in striving for more efficient risk management processes for all involved parties. I also believe that it could be a promising starting point for developing further the national food control systems. But the point is here, it could. We need to answer some questions in order to make it
successful maybe in more countries. What are the benefits? What value can the concept add to the food safety system from the opinion of a food business operator? We can answer this by answering the question whether there is an objective difference between a food business operator with a solid third-party assurance system and those without such an assurance system. I am absolutely convinced that there is a significant difference. I believe the food safety system of food business operators with such additional assurance system is more reliable than those of the others. So if there is a qualitative and objective difference between those FBOs, it's obviously very reasonable to assume we should make use of it when developing further the national food control systems. Why is it so? We can say that reputed certification standards usually go far beyond legal requirements. They require FBOs to establish a more elaborative control system in handling of food products. Those systems require us to implement very concrete risk management actions in our daily business. And anyway, a reputed food business operator would never stop at fulfilling legal requirements only. Therefore, all this additional assurance potentially is missing at an FBO without such scheme, potentially. So why should a competent authority treat or consider both groups the same risk category? A clear benefit of VTPA concept could be making the national food control systems more efficient and even more effective, I believe. It could give authorities a tool to use available resources on the point. And by doing this, to focus on more weak areas of food business market. Now I come to the challenges and maybe open questions. I mentioned already that I have some remarks on the concept. I would like to highlight maybe 1 or 2 points. I think we should discuss the concept not only from the perspective of the food safety authorities. That would not be sufficient to make the concept successful. It goes without saying that FBO would clearly and carefully evaluate risk and benefits before accepting, example giving, disclosure of data and information of this level of confidentiality to authorities. This is a clear risk. This is the risky part of the concept for us as a food business operator from our point of view. Now, what could be a potential benefit for giving access to authorities to such sensitive business information? An appropriate compensation for this risk could be a reduction of intensity and frequency of official inspections and all the related costs and efforts. According to the current codex, authorities may reduce intensity and frequency, but they may. It's not a firm commitment. To my opinion, a vague hope for a benefit may not be concrete enough to encourage food business operators to embark on such courageous undertaking. But I believe this is something we can fix along the process of implementation. And therefore, I would give a like to this concept. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabriel. And yeah, I immediately have some questions, but I will keep them until the end if we have some time, because we're already rather late. Because now I want to turn to the red tractor, and I'm still interested why it's called red tractor. And Philippa, what kind of data is being shared by Red Tractor as a VTPA scheme with the authorities in the UK? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom. I will explain why it's called Red Tractor in a minute, but I'm delighted to be here to share our experience as a VTPA assurance scheme and the way in which we've worked with the Food Standards Agency in partnership in the UK. I think it's important to explain that that partnership has developed over quite a long period of time. We are well over 10 years into that partnership. And I think, you know, I've heard the word nervousness a lot earlier. I think it's something that we definitely experienced in the UK. But hopefully what I can do is give you a bit of reassurance that actually by developing that partnership over a period of time, that nervousness goes away and actually turns into trust, and trust by both parties. So hopefully I can give you some insight into how the system in the UK works to bring some of it to life, I suppose, in real terms. So just to explain a little bit about who we are as Red Tractor, we are a VTPA. We operate only in the UK, and the purpose of which and why we were created was to reassure the consumers about the safety and the fact that the food that they're buying is farmed with care. Why is it called Red Tractor? It is actually also a consumer mark that appears on product, so the consumers know when they're buying the product that it is being produced to those standards. And what icon can you use that immediately brings to life the consumer that it's a farm, and it's a tractor. So that's why it's a tractor, and it's a red tractor because we have some iconic red tractors in the UK. But in terms of the scale of the business, we cover 50,000 FBOs. The majority of them are farms. So we are inspecting farms annually or every 18 months in the UK. So we are on a very large scale. We cover all sectors except for fish and eggs. So that's beef and lamb, dairy, poultry, pigs, fresh produce, combinable crops and sugar beets. And as I said, we're very well established. So the farm assurance schemes first started towards the end of the 1990s in the UK. And I think the relationship that we have with the Food Standards Agency is very much shown through the codes that Mike talked about that are now part of Codex. It's probably also worth saying that we're a national assurance scheme. So when we share data, we're not giving any commercial insights into any particular supply chains, because all of our major retailers and food businesses and food brands require, as part of their buying specifications, that the products they're buying are Red Tractor. So by sharing data, we're not disclosing one particular supply chain because it's very broadly taken up by the whole industry. Also, we are a scheme owner. We are not the certification body. We subcontract our certification bodies, but we have very close oversight as to how those certification bodies work, and it's them that is accredited to ISO 1765. So our standards are based, food safety is clearly core to our food standards, but they're wider than just food standards. They cover animal welfare and environmental protection as well. They're looking at areas, obviously, that are on consumers' minds and that consumers want to be reassured by. But they don't just reflect legislation, as been mentioned. They go further than legislation in a number of those areas. So specifically about data sharing, because I know that's what we're here to talk about, it's really important that that data sharing provides a benefit to both parties. In fact, all three parties that Mike talked about, whether it's the competent authority, the VTPA, or the FBO that is involved. And it's also really important that that data sharing is done within a very secure environment, and particularly when we talk about individual businesses, I'll explain a bit more about what I mean by that. But I think it's really important to think about data sharing in two different ways. The first of which is data sharing that can, by sharing data as the assurance scheme, we can give the competent authority that reassurance that the scheme is robust and operates robustly. And that's by sharing data on an aggregated basis. It's about performance of the entire scheme, not individuals within the scheme. And there are a number of different things that we share with them. So firstly, clearly, we need to be very transparent about our standards. And and whenever we change standards, the competent authority needs to reassure that actually the standards do cover the legislation to the extent that reassures them that when we're checking compliance, we are actually checking compliance with legislation, even though we might be going further. We'll also share data around number of inspections, how many inspections we've done over, and we share data on a quarterly basis. This is performance data. So the number of inspections that we've done, particularly more recently, how those inspections have been done. So we developed remote inspection process very early on into the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We had very regular liaison with the Food Standards Agency at the time so that they understood what we were doing, how we were doing it. And actually they sat in on a number of remote assessments to reassure themselves that it was being done robustly. So the number of inspections and how often we're going. Also the number of certification suspensions and withdrawals of certification. Clearly, for the scheme to be credible, you need to make sure that the scheme can impose sanctions when they find non-compliance or major areas of non-compliance. So we're sharing data to demonstrate that we are taking that action. And then more specifically down to the non-compliances around specific standards, again, on an aggregated basis. So against certain standards that are relevant to the food safety legislation, how often are we picking up non-conformances against each individual standard? And actually, that's a really good way of describing a two-way process, because the competent authority is also sharing with us what they're finding on farm as well. So are we finding the same sort of areas? It's reassurance to both parties that actually we're finding similar areas and similar issues on farm. And then also we will also share where our standards go above legislation in areas around, so for example, antibiotic usage, which isn't necessarily, the responsible use of antibiotics isn't necessarily built totally into legislation, but clearly as an assurance scheme, we're covering areas like that. So again, that gives the competent authority more reassurance about the wider aspects of which the scheme is working. So that's all about data sharing to demonstrate the robustness of the scheme. But secondly, we have to have data sharing clearly. The Competence Authority needs to know which businesses are certified as part of the scheme. And that is within our scheme rules. The FBO gives permission for their information, purely who they are, and as to whether they are certified or not. It's actually part of the requirements of ISO 1765 that you have to publish who is certified anyway. But the fact that we can then share that, and we have a portal system that allows the competent authority and those that they devolve that inspection to, so that they can download that information. It does not include any information about the results of the inspection that we've done. It is purely the business name and the fact that they are certified. And then that allows the competent authority to then build that into their risk profiling of that individual business in terms of how they're going to inspect them. So there is no individual data. The fact that the arrangement that we have means that the competent authority trusts Red Tractor and the assurance scheme to have done the inspections and make sure that that business is compliant with the standards. There's also data that comes back to us as an assurance scheme. I've already talked about things that are being found by the competent authority on farm as well, and we will have a discussion about certain things and how can we collectively help the industry improve in these areas. But also they provide us with aggregated data on their inspections, so we can go back to our FBO members and actually demonstrate that this arrangement is providing them with a benefit, i.e. they're getting less inspections compared to FBOs that are not part of the Red Tractor scheme. And that's also really important. And then because that relationship has developed over the years, as Mike said, We share witnessing and shadowing visits. So we will go on competent authority inspections and we can learn a bit about how they approach things, and they will come and some of their staff will come and witness a Red Tractor inspection as well, and perhaps share some inspection training. And we've certainly shared insights in terms of how remote assessments work and the learnings from remote assessments. So just to summarize, I think it does take time. But we have a really good partnership and collaboration that benefits all three parties. It benefits the competent authority. It means they can more accurately risk profile the businesses and the FBOs and better target their resources. As a scheme, it gives us the recognition that the competent authority believes the scheme is managed robustly. That helps us with our the rest of the supply chain that are recognizing Red Tractor and also consumers. And then the FBO members themselves, so very much reducing that audit burden and just that recognition that actually they are compliant, they're doing things well, and that the competent authority has recognised that. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what we do, but I'm very happy to answer any specific questions.
Thanks a lot. Fascinating. I have two questions, maybe to Mike and Peter, because UK and Germany seem to use slightly different systems, right? There were the two different approaches, and whereas the first approach is a closer relationship of the authority with the schemes, basically. The second one keeps a bit more of a distance. Now, what are the risk and benefit in the approach that you see, Mike, for the UK approach that was taken?
Thank you, Tom. Was that a different question than you told me earlier? The risk and benefit. Obviously, the guidelines do state quite clearly in the principles that the roles and responsibilities don't change. So when something goes wrong at a food business operator, and we live in the real world, things do go wrong. The risk we carry from the relationship we have with the VTPA owner is our consumer is not going to blame the VTPA owner. They're going to look at the regulator and they're going to say, you turned your back, which is why it's so important for us to have this relationship with the VTPA owner and to monitor. And what we see is the ability to fix problems, where we find systemic issues through these quarterly meetings, and we work together on a program to help address and fix those problems. And as Philippa said, that could be through a training program for their auditors or our inspectors. So this is a win-win situation, I believe. But yes, the regulator continues to carry the risk. It's a risk that we have all the time, and we can't go to sleep on the job.
Thanks, Mike, and sorry. This is always my nightmare if somebody asks me a question that I was not prepared for, but you did it excellently. Peter, you put me up with this by talking about the different approaches. So from your side, how do you see it?
Sure, that's perfectly fine. What are the risks? What are the benefits? To be honest, with this VTPA approach, the UK, the Netherlands, and also Belgium, they did for the regulators in Europe really groundbreaking work because they were dealing with this topic, I would say, like at least 10 years ago. So they made a lot of experiences, and they have a lot of insights into the system, what they are also sharing in all the working groups. So the risk would be that the regulator is maybe, let's say, accepting a private assurance scheme or is taking into consideration information from a private assurance scheme, which the competent authority has not accepted in the second approach, where you have a direct interaction between the competent authority and the FBO. But as I said, there's really groundbreaking and important work done. A lot of experiences from the regulators. There are also studies from the academia showing that certified FBOs in general perform better during official controls. So this is the experience from the last 10 years, I would say. There's really strong evidence that certification leads to a better performance during the official control. And therefore, the approach 2 was developed. And this is the benefit, because we know that the regulators have limited resources. So if we know that the private assurance schemes do a really good job, they are accredited, and that their certifications really improve the food safety, the regulators usually don't have to put so many resources any longer to give acceptance or approval to the private assurance schemes, that they are doing a good job. You can trust them. This is also an important word. You can trust their results, and you can consider them for the official controls. This is the benefit, that the regulators have less author bureaucracy and bureaucratic burden, and more time to focus on more risky parts in the businesses. Only one example, we know, for instance, that a lot of the documentation, like the hazard guidelines or the GMPs in the FBOs, are perfectly, let's say, certified by the private assurance teams. So the regulators don't have to put so many efforts into proving documents. They really can go into, depending on the FBO, and the more risky parts, and finally improving the food safety. And I think this is our main goal in the whole system. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to both of you. And I heard the word trust, which is really an important word here. And maybe that also explains a little bit of a different approach, because if you have longer experience and more trust, then you can act maybe slightly differently than if you have to build that trust. So, and I think both approaches are also flexible enough, and both fall into the Codex guidelines. Thanks very much to all of you, because now it's only us standing in between lunch and the continuation of the session. We had a couple of questions, but we have no time for that, unfortunately. But thanks to the panel. Thank you very much for being here and answering all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this excellent discussion. Now it is the end of our first session, and we are going for the lunch break. We will reconvene at 2:30, which is about 90 minutes from now. If you don't know the way, don't worry. Our UNIDO colleagues will direct you to the cafeteria of the VIC. Bear in mind, only cash payment is accepted in the cafeteria, and if you need to withdraw money, there is an ATM on the first floor. You just need to use the lift on the right side of the conference room. So thank you very much, and see you later. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a very nice lunch. We are going to start the second session of the Vienna Food Safety Forum. So today we have a number of great speakers that will discuss about data sharing and public-private dialogue. I have the honor to introduce Professor Samuel Godefroy, who is the president of Global Food Regulatory Science Society and your moderator for this session. Professeur Godefroy, à vous l'honneur.
Merci beaucoup.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you all. Good evening or good morning to those of our viewers who are joining us from North America. It's a pleasure to be with you today and a great privilege to be included as part of the organization of this Vienna Food Safety Forum. I have the pleasure and the privilege to be moderating this second session dedicated, as was mentioned, to an important aspect related to data and the importance of data in transforming food safety systems, and that's data sharing. The challenges that were discussed this morning and that are faced by food systems call for new ways of doing business, certainly new ways for doing business on the part of regulators or competent authorities, but also by food business operators and producers, including the interaction and the way the exchange happens between producers and regulators. Now, to ensure that decisions are made by regulators or by producers are systematically based on evidence, data is crucial, and data-fueled decision-making processes are of the utmost importance. We have discussed this morning the reliance on third-party assurance programs, or VPTA, as an example that offer opportunities for data collection, for data analysis, and for data sharing that support effective compliance verification to ensure the application of food safety requirements and also contribute to maintaining consumer confidence. This afternoon, we'll be focusing on opportunities of data sharing, particularly between public and private partners. I'm going to talk about the data needs, how data can be collected, what are the requirements, what are the challenges, and what could be offered to create an enabling environment to promote a key ingredient for data sharing, and that is trust between partners. We're privileged to have with us a number of speakers and contributors to this panel. I'm going to actually follow the order that I was given here. So the empty seat is not empty because we are really fortunate to be joined online by Don Prater, Associate Commissioner for Imported Food Safety from the US Food and Drug Administration. Thank you for being with us, Don. And hopefully, yes, and we can see you. So it's great to have you with us. We are also joined by Julie Pierce, Director of Openness, Data and Digital from the UK Food Standards Agency. Next, we have with us Frederick Suvegato, Head of Area for Food Safety from the Austrian Agency for Health and Food Safety. And next, we have a colleague who's probably known to many of you in the data management and digitalization, Bobby Krishna from the Food Safety Department at the Dubai Municipality in the United Arab Emirates. And last but not least, we have with us Nima Baramalian, Industrial Development Experts at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So we're going to be discussing the various facets of this topic with our speakers representing regulators, representing also the environment that deals on a daily basis with food business operators, and also the capacity building and industrial development arena. We're going to start with perhaps a first question directed to our regulators community. And probably regulators are those who are in the ones that are most in need for data, and probably the ones that will be using it most crucially for decision making. And I would like to perhaps start with the crucial nature of availability of data, the sources of data that regulators tend to rely upon to support their evidence-based decision-making processes. And if I can ask Dawn, Julie,
and Friedrich here, and if you allow me to address you by your first names, by the way, just really to share with us some of the experiences that you've had in the way you access the data, the challenges that you have faced, and particularly in the way you interact with regulated parties, with the food business operators community. Don, would you mind starting us off?
Yes, well, thank you very much, Sammy. It's so nice to be with everyone today. Apologies, I can't be there in person, but let me just say that this is such a timely discussion. Every day we're talking about data and information at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So as you mentioned, as regulators, we work on evidence-based, and increasingly that base of evidence is really growing. Food business operators, of course, have the responsibility to produce safe food. Regulators have a role for providing regulations and guidance to help assure the safe production of food, and also to provide oversight and ensure compliance. I think this is the point that people often want to hear about from regulators. One of the things I'll share is that increasingly we are using predictive analytic tools. We're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to drive our risk-based resource allocation. So those oversight activities, the things that we do, such as inspections and sampling, we want to use data and information to guide us. Believe it or not, we do have constrained resources. We can't be every place all the time. And so we are looking to be able to go to places and do things, our regulatory activities that are the most impactful for public health. So recognizing these new tools, and the critical component that underlies them all is data and information. In the 21st century, or at FDA, as we like to say, in the new era of smarter food safety, better food safety begins and ends with better data. I mean, that's where we're at. These tools are really powerful, they're really helpful, but it all comes back down to data. Sources of data and information, internal, external, public, private. We sit on a mountain of data as regulators. So we get this from compliance history, the results of samples and other information from regulatory activities, but we know industry also has quite a bit of data. And then beyond that, there are rich sources of data that are relevant to food safety, such as food production, distribution, consumption, aspects that are influenced by things like weather. Think about wind, rain, flooding, climate, temperatures of the surface and oceans, transportation and logistics. As we come out of the pandemic, we are seeing more and more information about supply chain. So travel time through ports actually influences food safety. And social media. Think about the social media platforms that are collecting data on foodborne illness. It's just amazing the rich source of data and information that are out there. What are the challenges? Well, I think we're going to talk about some of them today, and I'll hold some of those comments, but data quality, of course, is a big one. But one of the challenges in sharing data and information is assuring confidentiality and creating that environment, that enabling environment where where the fear of punitive action is minimized. That will help us to get better together. So in our new era of smarter food safety, we're looking at exploring and supporting a variety of initiatives that we think will help facilitate data and information sharing. So we're looking at data sharing platforms, leveraging reliable third-party audits, of course. We also have an element in our leafy green STEC action plan, where we're working with our growers on leafy greens to develop a data sharing platform. We're looking at partnerships with international food safety regulators. So data and information is so important. This discussion so timely to what we're doing. Having addressing these challenges in terms of things that will help us to share data and information, I think is the key priority. And I'm really anxious to learn and hear about the discussion today. I've got a few ideas I'll share, but I'll hold those till later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Don, for kicking off certainly the discussion with some of the uses, the important uses of data, but also some of the key requirements and initial challenges faced. Perhaps actually here, moving maybe closer to home and to Austria, and maybe to Frederick through your experience, Frederick, about those challenges related to data sharing, accessibility, and so on.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. For us, first of all, our agency in Austria is not a competent authority, but we work in close connection with the competent authority. Our main activity is the testing of samples all over Austria, all the official samples, and also to giving the expert opinion on these samples. But we also support the ministries and the competent authorities in planning the inspection, in elaborating the sample plans. So one could say, and this we are just discussing, we have a very high level of food safety in Austria and also in Europe. So do we need any data from private sources? But on the other hand, we have reduced resources, as we have heard before, and also we have new challenges. And one of them is perhaps sustainability. All the food businesses claim that they have sustainable production, but who can check this? Also, we have the problem of food fraud and deception. And this is the way we have the same way and the same interests together with the food business operators. And all these additional activities these resources are decreasing means that we need to overthink the system, and we should also go into to see the full system. That in Europe means this also the inclusion of the self-control data. And our risk assessors in our agency since many years ask for the possibility to get this private data to make a better risk assessment. We only have the data from the official control, but in the risk assessment, you would need a better databases, and that would be available if you got the data from the private sector also. We just started these discussions, but now we face some challenges, and the main, as I said before, is confidentiality of data and also trust in data. And as a competent authority, it's difficult to learn, and we heard that before, in some countries, it took many years to change the system from the independency of the data to the authority-driven data collection. And one example is, as Peter Wendt said before, Austria is also a country following the second step approach. That means the Food Safety Authority gets the data directly from the food business operator, and there are no private assurance systems between. And the challenges I would face is, of course, also the confidence of the consumer. Whenever we have a food-based outbreak or some food crisis, as we say, very often they are media crisis, but the public sees it a bit different, and for them it's a food crisis, then of course, the food business operator is responsible, but the second most responsibility goes to the competent authority. And if we take data from private systems, how can we make sure that we don't lose our independence? This might be one of the challenges we have.
Thank you. Thank you for these insights. And Julie, would you like to continue commenting from the regulator's perspective?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. So from the point of view of the Food Standards Agency in the UK, I think it's safe to say we've been on a journey, I think is the phrase. And we maybe started a number of years ago with a somewhat simple and maybe simplistic model of just looking for open data, publication of all data. And that was both successful in many ways with our food hygiene rating service data that we've been publishing for a number of years, but also we were met with a degree of resistance from a number of operators within the food system.
And that also included some other government departments in publishing all of this data, just maybe putting it out there without any thought as to who might use it and for what purpose. That took effort. And we really needed to challenge ourselves as to whether it was worth doing. But overall, I still think it is better to be publishing that data than not sharing, or just allowing a few powerful data controllers to move into the sector. And I think a number of speakers have touched on the realization of the power of data. It's just unstoppable within the food sector and other industries. So therefore, it's an area where we can't do nothing. We can't put our head in the sand and think it doesn't apply to us. We have to be out there and operating. As I said, we learned a lot through those early years. We built data publication platforms and tools and started to understand this world of data was actually quite complicated. It was complex, and it wasn't just a simple set of stuff where you just decided whether to push it out there and publish, or you decided to keep it internal just to your own purposes. So now I think we have a different mindset, and my colleagues have sort of touched on some of the opportunities they've been exploiting. And it's much more now about having the right information available at the right time to make a decision, whether it's a piece of analysis, piece of research, or it's down at the level of real time, do I allow this transaction to proceed? And I think more and more, and Don touched on this earlier, more and more it's about predicting the future. That's where we want to be. We don't want to be looking backwards as to what has happened. We want to be predicting the future, whether it's predicting what's going to happen next week, or predicting what might happen in the next 1 to 5 years. That's becoming increasingly important to us, and I don't need to mention things like pandemic or climate change as being drivers to really ensure that we can predict the future. And that prediction of the future is all of us. So many of the comments I'm making now apply to all the actors within the food system. We all have a role to play together. Also, we learned the importance of data governance. So those data owners, those who may need to access the data, may need to use the data. Understanding those roles, they are very important, valid, they need to be understood. And we needed to apply the right sorts of techniques to unpack all of that. It wasn't about building great big monolithic data lakes that only one organization could own and use. I think there are more opportunities for all of us in understanding that. So how to get our head around what needs to happen? We need to improve accuracy of the data. There is a lot of data out there. Some of it is good and some of it is not good. Where it isn't good, in actual fact, there's much that we can do to improve it. So don't shy away from data that on the face of it doesn't look to be good. There may be other sources of data that can improve that data. Timeliness of data, that speed, getting hold of data as close to real time as possible, that is really important to us. And again, to do that, the standards, the governance, all of those things are needed, but the technology is helping us. There are innovations in collection of data, transportation of data, analytics tools to exploit the data, and enabling that sharing. And it's come up again and again. We've talked about the system, the food system. It's not just one nation's data or one company's data. This is about the system. It's about the supply chain. It's about understanding how that data flows through the supply chain in the way that the food does. The data is moving through that supply chain as well. So we need to view it in that mental model. It's a supply chain of data. But to do that, we need to be able to share. We need to have the governance and agreements to allow us to share, and we need to have the technical underpinning to allow that sharing to happen.
So where are we now? Fantastic opportunities. And I think Don described a number of things which we were already doing. This isn't just about the future and what we might do. It's what we are already doing. So carry on, do more, just get better and better at it. And where are we sitting at the moment? I think we do need to get much better at overcoming some of the trust issues. It's been touched on a number of times today, the importance of trust, understanding how to enable trust. Transparency and openness is important. It is an enabler, but also requiring those underpinning data management techniques that enable that trust. Fragmentation, again, it's that supply chain. But fragmentation across a system, maybe food, even more so than any other industry. There are a number of very large organizations, commercial organizations, and there are many, many micro businesses. There's a long tail of micro businesses. And I think there's a general observation that the food system is particularly asymmetric. So much of that data being originally created by many who may not see the value of that data. The value is derived, exploited by others within the system. So I think we need to understand that asymmetry and make sure that we address it. And then finally, data literacy, to get people more and more engaged as to the value of data. It's an asset. We need to treat it as such for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie, for this great overview. And perhaps actually before moving forward with another experience, I would like maybe to unpack a couple of challenges that you've all highlighted. From a regulator's perspective, you are both at the receiving end of data, but also at the disseminating end. So there should be mechanisms to receive the data, whether be it actually data collected by yourselves as regulators or actually shared by the private partners. And then from there is also a potential for the data to be shared by yourselves as regulators. I guess I would like maybe to pause a minute and perhaps ask you about some of the policy challenges that you may face. And particularly when I say policy here, did you find that you had to make changes to your legislative mandate such that you are empowered to get access to the data, but also to give any type of guarantees to those who provide you with the data as to the way the data will be used? So I would like just to pause a little bit on some of the challenges related to change in policy, any type of legislative regulatory impediments that may be faced or that should be thought about by regulators if, again, data is becoming such an important element in the decision making. So here, opening it up, Dawn, feel free to intervene from a US perspective, and of course, our regulators here, Friedrich and Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Sammy. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and start
Sure.
on that one. You've highlighted a very important issue. At first, when you were speaking, I thought you were going to talk about the platforms to sort of technically take in the data and information. That's a very interesting aspect. Some of my data scientist colleagues are using the term ingest. We're going to ingest these data. But I think the question you ask is really more around the policy. So what are the requirements for data, legislative requirements for data? We have some. Notably, later this fall, we are going to publish a requirement for food traceability. And so the traceability rule will actually require that regulated industry contain or hold certain key data elements and critical tracking events. We think this is going to be hugely impactful for outbreak response. So this is going further than one step forward, one step back. But one of the things we really hope that will happen out of this legislation, this requirement, it's not for all foods, It's for what we call certain foods on our food traceability list. But the bigger item here coming out of this legislative requirement is harmonization. So I think I heard Friedrich and Julie mention about using global standards, about harmonizing around things. I think you probably had a great discussion this morning on how Codex can help. But I think harmonizing is one of the things that a legislative requirement can start to do. And we can start to talk about those things that are in common. The other aspect of this is voluntary. So this is a very large space that's been highlighted by this discussion. Some of these data and information are already out there, publicly available. So thinking about some of the wind and weather information that are publicly available. And certainly that's an aspect to think about, what do we publish? We have to be very careful there. But in terms of voluntary submission from the industry. So I think the industry is really interested in also in how we apply our regulatory oversight. And so we want to go places where there's increased risk. We want to spend our precious resources, public health, addressing places where there's increased risk. The flip side of that, or the other side of the coin, is safe food needs to be, sort of sped on its way to consumers. And so voluntary submission of data, these voluntary platforms, I think will form a large portion, as well as those things that are actually required. So there's at least a couple of aspects there. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, if I attempt to answer the same question, and maybe picking up on some of what Don's been saying there, I think also in the UK, regarding the legislation, the answer is also mixed. We have some legislation that we use, others may be more in the sort of policy application of guidance space. So we don't necessarily need additional legislation. I think it's also very important to understand one of the roles of organizations like ourselves as regulators. It may be the body that defines and agrees what the standard's going to be. And we're certainly finding in the discussions that we're having with food businesses in the UK, having that standardization and consistency, having that level playing field, knowing what is required is supremely valuable. And so I think that's one of the roles that we can play to just make it easier for businesses to share that data with both ourselves and with others operating in the sector. I think that the international dimension is important, and Don talked about the new traceability regime that's being implemented over in the US, and we're very interested in that as well. And again, it seems to be at the first take anyway, valuable that there is one broad approach. Everybody knows and everybody can share information in principle globally. Certainly in the UK, we import a lot of food, so we need to make sure that the data will be flowing with the food that we import, and we want to be able to make sense of the data that will accompany that food. So I think that's important. One final thing around making all of this as easy as possible is we're talking today about food safety and the data that can provide insight into food safety. But we're also operating as data experts, data engineers, data analysts. We're also operating in a world that's grappling with the sustainability of the food. And it was touched on earlier on about the animal welfare of the food that's being produced. You think, in an ideal world, it would be great that we create one data infrastructure that may achieve a number of different outcomes, or at least try to be as efficient as possible as we can with this data infrastructure that we're building.
Thank you, Julie. Frederick?
Thank you. I think the most has been said before. For me, also the policy change I'm not sure, maybe only in the area of data protection or data privacy. This might be perhaps a change necessary. The other things which are very important, and it starts how the data are prepared, how the data are produced. It also would be the standardization. I think there is no policy change necessary if we have the standardization process. One other thing I feel, and that's from the day life, how to deal with infringements, with non-compliances. When we have the data, we need the full data, not only the good ones. Of course, for risk assessment, it's necessary to see what the real situation is. And there we have to find maybe some regulations or maybe also some policy change, how to deal with enforcement and penalties for food business operators which are open to provide all the data, also ones that are not so good. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for these insights. And I guess moving to a jurisdiction that has been known to have embarked on a journey for digitalization now for a number of years, and actually I think aspiring to be paperless in a few years, if it's not already the case. So the Dubai jurisdiction. Bobby, the food safety management systems in Dubai embarked on a journey for digitalization. I mean, the word journey is used a lot here. Can you share with us essentially how was that planned? How was it implemented? What have you learned? And what are the challenges that we could benefit from?
Thank you, Sami, for this opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I talk about Dubai, I thought a couple of points that I wanted to clarify. One is that regulators around the world are renowned for creating the need for a document and a record. So when we write legislations, we write that you need a certification or you need a documented procedure with a record that can be traced back. So we already created the need for data. But the only thing is that we let it be trapped in a document rather than be used as a data source, which can be used later. So every inspection that we go, every product that we inspect is accompanied by a set of documents. And when we digitize this information into e-certification, we continued the same process, except that it was no longer a paper, it was a digital certificate. Again, the data is not available. And that data is not available because we don't have ownership for that data. Who owns it is a question. So these two are major constraints when we look at a sort of regulator as to whether that data can be utilized or not, and whether that data can create a story for you to make some decisions. And most regulators also utilize data coming in from foodborne illness notifications. So you look at your surveillance data, look at your inspection data, and these two data sets have one common trend. They are mostly lagging because you get the information after a problem has occurred. So you know that a foodborne disease has occurred, or you have a failure in test or inspection. The failure has already occurred, so your data is already lagging. So where can we get the data that's leading or preventative? And we look at hazard-based approaches. We always talk about preventative systems. And if you want to be preventative, you need data that tells you there is something that's going to go wrong. And that's where we wanted to get to. So Dubai started its digitalization journey in 2003. It was a simple digitization process where we looked at automating our inspection system. Instead of writing on a paper, inspectors started writing on a document. And it continues till today. And most countries that have digitized these processes also know that they just want it to be easy for businesses to see the inspection reports. And at the end of the inspection, you get a grade or a score, which can be published. So simple, but there you don't have a data story. You just have an information story. Then we also moved on with digitization of our import process, and 90% of the food in Dubai is imported. And because we are a single agency, we also look at inspection at the port and inspection in the food facility. So we looked at the digitization process in imports. We started looking at what products are coming in, and also record transactions which are done by the inspectors. So we could kind of figure out where the inspectors marking, what problems are they noticing, and then in 2007 we moved on to digitizing our laboratory process. And just before we started looking at laboratory reporting systems, we also digitized the food. So we had to create codes for each food item that comes into the boat so that it becomes traceable and a laboratory result can be associated with a food or a food business through their license numbers. Once we finished this, it was like a plain phase for the next 7-8 years. We continued with these systems. And in 2015, we started to know more about Facebook and Netflix and YouTube. And that's when we realized that data is not about finishing transactions. It's about how are we going to predict the market. So if you look at the historical way of or traditional way of looking at data, that would be an online shop selling a product. But that's not what Facebook did. Facebook started selling you in your data by capturing your own data and selling it back to you. So that could be something that could be utilized in food safety, but not in the way that you want to make profit. But can we give public health outcomes which are better at a value and not worry about the profits? And our profits would be diseases that are in control. So we started looking at a different approach for food safety management. And we thought, why don't we come up with a simple tool for food businesses wherein they can do their checks every day on an app? So I wake up in the morning, I get to my facility, and I go through my app and say, all right, there's nobody who is ill today, so I mark it tick, and I don't have a cleaning problem. Oh yes, looks like my hand wash basin is not working, so I mark it check there and say, hey, who's my colleague who can take care of it? So that colleague is also registered. Now, where did we get these people registered? Because we are a single agency again, we also have information of training. So instead of giving training certificates, we give them digital training certificates. So after the training is over, the training center enters the name of the person. Now, this happens everywhere in the globe. If you go to the United States, personal certification systems are online, but it's just that the government is not owning that data. It's with the certification bodies. Whereas in our case, we provided a platform for the training centers to use where they can put the information and the score of the person and also tell us that the certificate is given because of the assessment was completed. And that data can be utilized to say that the business complies with our certification requirement for the person or the training requirement for the person. And inspectors can continue to use that token to verify whether the center complies. So it don't have to be there to physically verify the certificate anymore. So that information also get used for all the transactions because the app is customized to that user. So by the time they finish the training, they also have a registered username and password on the app, which can be used for checks. And because everyone is connected on a single platform, they can transact between each other. So that transaction can happen between business to business or person to person who is in the network. So imagine like a LinkedIn where everyone who is professionally connected can exchange information between each other. And that goes between as an option or as a voluntary option between the users. Now they can opt not to use that, but they can still say that we have a problem. Now we also incentivized further by saying that if you want to contact your pest contractor, and so in Dubai, for instance, every business has a contract with a pest control company that's also under our jurisdiction, and not the food safety department, but our sister department looks at the pest contract companies to ensure that they deliver services rightly. So when there is a pest problem in the morning, they can directly contact their pest control services through the platform. So you don't need to go write a record and then wait for morning to like 10 a.m. to call your contractor, only to find out that they're not picking up the call. Now from the system, it directly notifies the contractor and the contractor acts. So it's a simple example of how you can loop information when everybody is on a single platform. Now, in effect, what we did is we kind of automated and digitalized as much information as possible, allowing businesses to transact. And we also kept the other side of all our services are available through the application in a digitalized format. Because if you want to participate in an event in Dubai, you need to have a good grade like A, B, or C, not D or F, which indicates that you have critical food safety failures. Now, when you apply for an event permit, if you don't have A, B, or C, the permit won't move forward. So, I mean, it's a utilization of our own grading system, but in a different way, because now they are also incentivized to comply, because you can't apply for a permit. And 5 years ago, that was an independent process. So if I go to participate in the event and I want a permit, I would go with an inspection report, and the inspector has to verify physically the report and allow you to do a permit. So there's so many, I can continue to go on with a lot of stories, but the important aspect is also that consumers are linked, and this is a transparency-based model. It is not a regulator centered model. And most organizations that I come across talk about inspectors being utilizing the data. And we say inspectors are just contributors of data, verifiers of data, but they're not actually the source of data. So businesses provide the data, and we come up with a compliance scoring mechanisms that can be utilized in a way that consumers can see how much you comply with. And that's pretty much what all the transparency model platforms use today. When you're going out to eat on in a place that you're not familiar with, you look at the ratings from Google. It's simple tool, but we have certain rules that kind of tweak this. You can't play with the system that easily. So there are certain rules that you need to follow, and that gets converted into a score, which consumers can see and make decisions, and they are delivered through a QR code to every business. So they don't just see the inspectors grading, they also see what the self-compliance scores are from a business. So that incentivizes businesses to contribute more data. And all of this comes at the price of French fries per day. So it's a subscription model. So every business contributes a French fries pack to food safety every day, and they pay annually a subscription. So instead of using it for like other programs, we use it for our system. And also it includes an e-learning module, which and it's all again a simple story. If an inspector marks a contravention during the inspection on pests, an e-learning module pops up to say that, hey, this is what you need to do to prevent pests from coming. So simple things can be done very easily with digital tools and digital networking. That's a lot, I think. So thanks for listening, and I'm available for questions anyways after.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you for introducing this new monetary unit as a French fries, unit for subscription fees by businesses. So, but that's, I guess, an illustration of what the contribution or the expected contribution may be. There's a lot in what you shared with us there, and I guess one of the key elements that you mentioned is the value addition that is created as a result of the availability of data. And I guess to make this value addition more general and not only the benefit of only industrialized nations, I guess I'm going to move to now the work that is being done in developing jurisdictions, and moving to Nima here and asking about your efforts as part of promoting industrialization, promoting more evolved business processes when it relates to food and agri-food production. What could be the role of these projects or of these initiatives to promote availability of data from the get-go, such that essentially they become, I would say, a natural element on the basis of which further decisions could be made or further systems could be built?
Thank you, Samuel. So I think the role of technical assistance here, when we talk about food safety, is to achieve the wider goal of the trade and public health. And there are a lot of avenues to reach there. But I think one of the key conditions there in the end of the day is that the food business operators, they indeed adopt a good practice, a technology, a practice that results in safe food. And this decision, especially in the case of the voluntary third-party assurance schemes, is indeed a voluntary decision. So the key question that we have to ask ourselves is that what drives the decision of a food business operator to adopt a good practice, to record the data, to self-report and share data? And that's the key question that if we can address through technical assistance, it will result in seeing more and more food businesses being able to adopt good practice and share the data. Now, there are various theories why certain behaviors exist or why certain decisions are made. I think two key factors affect the decision of the enterprises or the FBOs to participate in such schemes and share data. One is the perceived benefits of and costs of participating in such schemes or adopting a new practice. Whether it will bring additional commercial benefits to the company or not is not immediately visible to some of the FBOs, especially if you're talking about in a developing context where the return on the investment is not immediate in many of these cases. So how can the benefits and the perceived benefits become more and more visible? The incentive schemes can be made available to the FBOs to be able to, in a good business sense, make the decision to invest. And of course, whether sharing this data would result in reducing duplication in controls and therefore reducing the cost to the FBOs for getting the assurances and certifications. These all have a benefit aspect, and these should become more and more visible to the FBOs. There are some blockages into that. There are some time lags. There are some basically blocks into that, and these can be removed through technical cooperation. The second aspect that I think is, impacts the decision of the FBOs is the perceived ease of using the technology. I think it's important to notice that when we talk about in the trade context, many of the enterprises that they're already engaged in the GVCs are those that they have certain level of capacities and skills, and participation in such schemes would not be such a difficult investment. But when we think about public health in a developing context, then we open the question to a wide array of weaker enterprises, that their distance until they can produce safe products, and the risk of producing unsafe products is reduced, and sustainable products increasingly, the distance is high. So there's a big gap in terms of the skills and technology. So of course, a lot of technology like digitalization can help in facilitating access to learning, access to training materials and certification, indeed. But I think it is important to also recognize that the technical assistance in this case should be able to, together with the counterparts, national counterparts and institutions, create an environment that makes the use of the technologies and the journey towards improving, continuous improvement is facilitated and made easier for the enterprises. And let me also reflect on the issue of in some cases, absence of legal frameworks that would clarify the relationship between the certification schemes and the private sector data and the regulators. So I think here is also a role of the role that UNIDO, an organization as such, can play in facilitating, based on good regulatory practices, facilitating a process where legal frameworks and policies are established within the country that would enable a trusted sharing of information and data between the industries and the regulators. And we talked also about the accuracy of data and how reliable they are. Indeed, the national quality infrastructure system plays an important role here. From the auditors that they audit the enterprises to inspection services, the way they are collecting the data and the way they are reporting on the procedures, these all can be made reliable only through a recognized national quality infrastructure system. So technical assistance can build the capacity of the auditors towards the accreditation, build capacity of the inspection services, third-party inspection services towards accreditation by national accreditation body that is signatory of IAF or other regional initiatives, and therefore creating an infrastructure system, a support system that would build trust between those who are going to use this data outside the country or within the country and those who are providing this data. So I think that's an important role that the quality infrastructure system can also play. Let me just finish by mentioning a bit of an example, a bit different, going away from what I spoke now, is more on the public good nature of the service that technical cooperation can provide. At UNIDO, we have been for some time now looking into data rejection, border rejection data. So the data that is produced by inspecting authorities in the incoming markets in incoming markets. Now, this data will tell us a lot of good information. A consignment comes from where, is rejected for what reason, what what's contained in this consignment, what is included in consignment. And that is a key piece of information that can help if you aggregate at the global level, looking at all the rejections of food and feed products. It can guide us towards understanding where lies the major compliance challenges. Is it related to bacterial contamination in which regions of the world? And that can guide and sharpen the technical assistance and international cooperation on addressing those major issues. And we all know that, of course, more and more increasingly, resources are less and less available to the national authorities to address food safety issues. So to really understand where the problem lies and to understand where could the investment make the major impact in terms of improving the food safety, one of the ways to look at that is the data on rejection. Now, if you look at globally, how the data on rejection is reported is very unharmonized. So we talked about harmonization of data and importance of that. It is here becomes really important, the way we report on the type of products and consignments, the reasons for rejections. Are we following specifically SPS measures, or we are having different criteria that we can use, trade-related criteria? So the harmonization of data at the global level, it can provide, it can facilitate aggregating the data from different market authorities in order for a greater good for the public information that can be used by the regulators, by the businesses, and by the buyers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nima, for highlighting some of these examples, but also, I guess, some of the opportunities for the future for a better usability of the information or the data itself. I guess I'm going to move maybe to a more interactive phase right now. We have received a few questions from the audience online, but I'm going to turn to the room here. I know we are post-lunch, but hopefully the caffeine will kick in shortly. And yes, please, Marcus.
Thank you. Marcus Lipp from FAO. So thank you for the great contributions, interesting perspectives. Data is, of course, the big thing these days, right? Nobody can do without data. And that's all nice and well and good, and everything works very great if the resources are commensurate with the data. So somebody has to ingest the data, some data scientist has to operate the systems, or some IT folks, and so on and so forth. And that works very well in all high-income countries, right? So that's wonderful. We know how Meta operates in Google, and so we know it's possible. And not that I'm saying that food safety comes up with similar amounts of data, but it can be very significant. So how does that map, in your opinions, how does that map to low and middle income countries where the resource constraints are much more paramount, and the asymmetry, if I would call it that way, particularly between multinationals and governmental settings, so multinational companies and governmental settings, could be absolutely leading to complete overload if it were desired by one of the actors, right? So what could there be done to mitigate these situations, and also not to, if those data that are to be submitted then were to be used for risk management decisions, and the data pool is heavily dominated by some actors that can provide cleaner supply chains than others. So how would we need to mitigate that in those settings? Just an open question. Thank you.
That's a fascinating question. And first of all, I don't have an answer. However, I think that's the sort of question, the sort of territory we need to be in now. We need to understand that. And again, it comes back to the point about it's a global food system. And what might I offer? First is I started as Director of Openness, thinking about open data. It's about publishing the data. And one of the ways we've moved on is, yes, but maybe there's more value in publishing and making open some of the algorithms and some of the ways the data is processed for the analytics. So we can make that, and we continue to make available, and we'll continue to publish as open algorithms for anyone to use some of the systems that we've developed. So there's an offer to be used by anyone who can make use of them. And I think I touched on that asymmetry point. I think it is really, really important. And whether we try to address it globally or we try to sort of narrow it down and just think of one single part of the supply chain. But I think we have to be trying to demonstrate where the value is being derived downstream from some data. If somebody does invest this piece of data, we need to be showing again and again the value that can be pushed back upstream. So I provide this data and I get some value back, either to help me ensure that my next production run is safer than it was before, or I can improve yields, or whatever it is, I can get a better price. How do we ensure we get that feedback loop? And again, it comes back to demonstrating data as an asset, and it provides value rather than it just being an overhead and we the regulator demand some data to sit on a certificate. We need to move into that space of making it valuable.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, Marcus, it's a great question. Just a couple of points here. I think, making sure that it has value is super important. As we look at data as a way to add to the value of that food product that's traveling through the food system, we can do things to potentially incentivize and also to be able to lower the barriers. So if you look at traceability data, for example, in our new era of smarter food safety, we initiated a low to no cost challenge. So this was a sort of an innovative approach. We know that there's a lot of solution providers out there. As soon as we announced that we were looking at tech-enabled traceability, we had a number of folks reaching out. So there are a number of videos that are available, low to no cost. I would just say that in terms of data collection and being able to put data into a system, think about a cell phone. Almost everywhere I go, somebody, a farmer in a field, a lot of places, if they have connectivity, has a cell phone. And if they don't have connectivity immediately, then they will get connectivity soon. So there are ways to start to bring data into the system. One of the challenges will be standardizing that. And so looking at global consensus standards, I think will help that. And then being able to, as Julie mentioned, demonstrate value, that this adds something to the product traveling through the food system. Certainly it's valuable to regulators. I think it's going to be valuable to other operators, retailers, manufacturers in the food system as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Bobby?
When we look at cost, we always think about how much is the compliance cost for businesses versus how much is to develop a software. So when we look at compliance costs for a certification in India, for instance, for HACCP certification, could be anything from like much is in dirhams, like 500 to 5,000 dirhams, dollars for a compliance certification, including all the aspects of the audits and certification. Now we look at that as a cost that is bearable because it has got an incentive that is I can export my food elsewhere, or I could show that as an evidence for someone else to get more business. But that value is still not there for the digitalization because they're not able to show it anywhere else to get the incentive. So coming up with an incentive tool or getting our platform sellers to utilize that would really incentivize the process. But yes, like there are very low cost models available today, and I haven't worked on building these softwares. I really know that it's not expensive to build simple applications. And also data visualization tools are very cheap now. In fact, if you have a Microsoft subscription, you can get a Power BI tool along with it for free, which can be utilized to handle a lot of data with. And that kind of visualization, even in its simplest form, makes data democratization possible. So more people can utilize the data. And we're all used to KPIs and dashboards usually that are built by companies. And what we want to do is to get more literate, as Julie said, like get data literate and try and utilize these tools like Power BI and kind of get more familiar with how we can use data for real-time decision making and slowly, move forward. And it's very important to be agile. And when I say agile, it's in the context of IT, we have to come up with agile methodology. So we don't build large softwares, but we build pieces over a period of time. So we have to bring in agile methodology into our building process. So you build small pieces of IT tools, and over a period of time, you get a system large enough to handle a lot of data sets. So I think that's an approach we need to do when we are short of resources.
I guess it's going to be also probably a new line of technical assistance in making these tools more accessible, more usable to the broader community of regulators, particularly from lower or middle income countries.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you. And maybe to rephrase that, maybe it was a little not so well disguised appeal to please make sure that the gap between low and middle income country and high income country and countries that have a lot of resources does not widen more than it already is. Data informatics has all the right tools, but also to widen that gap to become a gulf, right? So accessibility, high data speed transfer lines are available in many countries, but not heterogeneously. So rural settings are always very, very different. And Africa as per se as a continent is still not very well explored in that regard. There's very few data centers, for example. So let's just make sure that we're not losing sight of making efforts that this gulf does not deepen and does not widen. So thank you.
Thank you, and very, very good point. And actually, the appeal is very well noted, Marcus. Definitely. I guess I have a couple of questions here from the audience online. I'm going to take a question here, and I'm going to come back to the room. One question is linking essentially the discussion to this morning's discussion, and asking whether there is evidence for countries that have adopted the VTPA approach, on whether that has resulted in an improvement in reduction of public health impact, food safety public health impact. Let's say, for example, in a reduction of food safety outbreaks, or even in the improvement of the climate of public-private collaboration in the food safety space. So this is really linking things with this morning discussion and whether in jurisdiction, so this is not only open to our panelists, it's really open to the room, and linking really the discussion with this morning, if there is any evidence that shows that the application or the adoption of these VTPA. So I guess our colleague here from Senegal would like to intervene, please.
C'est bon. Voilà, merci, monsieur le modérateur, de nous avoir passé la parole. Donc, la délégation du Sénégal se félicite en tout cas de l'organisation de cet important forum sur la sécurité sanitaire des aliments. Et nous remercions au passage l'ONUDIEN qui a bien voulu en tout cas nous inviter à cette importante session. En fait, nous avons suivi avec beaucoup d'attention toutes les communications qui ont eu lieu ce matin. Donc, sur les APTV, évidemment, parce que le Sénégal est un pays, disons, qui fait partie, en tout cas, du pilote, pour un peu l'expérimenter. Également, sur les questions liées à la dématérialisation, donc la digitalisation des procédures sanitaires et phytosanitaires. Là également, ça nous a beaucoup intéressés. Et nous y sommes déjà, hein, parce qu'en réalité, nous avons constaté qu'effectivement, avec cette nouvelle démarche, on pourrait véritablement améliorer un peu le travail et rassurer davantage nos partenaires commerciaux. Pour la PTV en tant que tel, c'est vrai, le Sénégal est un pays pilote comme le Mali. Et nous avons commencé au niveau du Sénégal par les filières horticoles, notamment fruits et légumes, et particulièrement la mangue. Évidemment, c'est un système assez intéressant, car ça nous permet de consolider un peu tout ce que nous faisions avant, en termes de catégorisation des entreprises selon le niveau de risque qu'elles peuvent représenter pour le commerce international, et même pour planifier nos contrôles. Parce qu'au Sénégal, il s'agit effectivement de renforcer un peu disons, le système qui était déjà là, parce qu'il y avait déjà un système d'autocontrôle hein, qui était déjà au niveau de ces filières. Il fallait donc les renforcer, formaliser pour qu'à terme qu'on puisse effectivement utiliser ces données pour le système national de contrôle. Donc nous avons déroulé avec le projet APTV et les résultats sont quand même intéressants. Mais maintenant, il faudrait peut-être, disons, l'approfondir, essayer de l'étendre pour que véritablement tous les opérateurs puissent bénéficier, disons, de ce système d'autocontrôle. Maintenant, en ce qui concerne le point qui nous intéresse présentement lié au partage des données, j'avoue que c'est un point très, très intéressant, mais je pense qu'il faudrait aller, disons, de manière graduelle, parce qu'au niveau des entreprises du secteur alimentaire, ce que nous constatons, souvent, le partage d'informations n'est pas très facile. En tout cas, entre l'autorité compétente et l'entreprise du secteur alimentaire, ça peut aller. Mais entre entreprises, il y a une forte concurrence, si bien qu'en tout cas, nous, ces données, nous les gérons de manière, disons, très prudente pour ne pas créer certains précédents. Si on prend le cas des non-conformités aujourd'hui, autant c'est vrai, on n'en communiquait pas beaucoup, parce qu'effectivement, les entreprises ne veulent pas souvent que les données soient communiquées comme ça, en tout cas une large diffusion, mais c'est juste l'entreprise qui est concernée que nous essayons quand même de sensibiliser pour le suivi des non-conformités, mais on n'a pas encore le droit de partager ça largement au niveau de tout le réseau, en tout cas des importateurs ou exportateurs de produits agricoles. En tout cas, c'est des aspects assez intéressants que nous suivons, et j'avoue que peut-être que progressivement, qu'on fera atteindre tous les objectifs, en tout cas, et nous nous félicitons beaucoup, en tout cas, de cette approche APTV qui peut véritablement améliorer les choses. Merci beaucoup.
Merci pour votre intervention et puis merci d'avoir partagé déjà en fait ce qui peut être constitué comme étant une expérience d'ores et déjà positive de l'application finalement de ce programme pilote, ne serait-ce que sur une chaîne de valeur et puis également quant à l'amélioration du climat de confiance qui existe entre les partenaires en termes de sécurité sanitaire des aliments. Is there another intervention? There's one intervention here, and then I'm going to move to you, Steve. So please.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for that. And thanks to the presenters. That was quite informative presentations. My name is Kifilu. I'm coming from the African Union Development Agency. And I just want to really comment on my brother's on Senegal case on VPTA. I hope that also you are planning to implement it in the North, East, and Southern Africa going forward. And as AU, we have actually developed what is called Food Safety Index, whereby our heads of states have to report every 2 years about food safety issues. And listening to Bobby and Julie on the data innovation, how to actually really transform data to inform our decision makers. And I feel like in Africa, as Marcus has actually alluded to, we still have challenges and we don't have capacity in really accelerating food safety data to inform our decision makers. And I feel like the Malabo Declaration, which is the overall framework, is ending 3 years' time, which is 2025. And we don't miss the train, especially on the food safety relevance of Africa. We recently developed a food safety strategy, and we're working on the implementation plan of this strategy. And therefore, we need support of UNIDO and other partners that are here present to really accelerate food safety in Africa. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for these comments. Steve, please.
Thank you. Just Steve Wern, Codex. Just to stress a point you made, and I think it goes to the last intervention we heard about the need for almost a new front to open up in terms of technical assistance if we're going to make sure we can reap all of the benefits of data and digitalization that we're envisioning and envisaging in this couple of days. But to your point about whether VTPA leads to improvements in public health, I think it's relatively straightforward to articulate how it leads to a better targeting of regulatory resource, reduce the cost of regulatory inputs, reduces administrative burden on FBOs. And I was talking about this with some colleagues saying, so how can we try to demonstrate public health impact? Do we need some theory of change model we can test? And they said, well, no, just what's the observed reality? And in the UK, we've been using BTPA approaches in animal feed for the last 8 to 10 years, there have been no significant outbreaks of disease in humans related to an origin in animal health. And yet before we did that, they cropped up with alarming regularity. So if I were an epidemiologist, I would go to that evidence first. It's only one piece of evidence, but it's what we have. Thanks.
Thank you. It's quite encouraging. So at least from the information that is available, both from a jurisdiction that has been applying it for much longer time and those who are piloting the approach right now. I'm going to give you back the floor. Yes, please, Marcus. It's
sorry.
Yeah, please.
But thank you. Now I comment to the VTPAs, maybe. So I'm coming intrinsically from the assumption that anybody can govern only systems to the extent that the governor has the capacity to govern. So the capacity and capabilities of the government would need to be at least in par for those who are governed, right? VTPAs, of course, can create strong partnerships. Now, where this becomes or must be built on strong partnerships of maybe not fully equal partner, but certainly within the realm of equal partners between public and private. Now, what do we do, and what guards would we need to have in place to counteract any imbalance in those relationships? So in particular, industry or private sector is very quick in coordinating, at least on the international scale, the multinationals, and it's very easy to do so, comparatively speaking, because the number of players are much smaller and the interests are much more aligned compared to a government that needs to coordinate with everybody in the nation, right? And the therewith going diversity that we so see in all in our countries. So the coordination powers of the private sector are always faster, always stronger. And that would then intrinsically lead to an imbalance, particularly if it's a smaller country or a low and middle income country versus multinational organizations. And that extends for me then to the concept of who is the schema owner, who dictates the terms and who has the power to say, to push against that. So I haven't heard much, and not this morning and not this afternoon in this regard, how we would address these intrinsic power imbalances in the food control systems if we open that for public-private partnerships to maintain the sovereignty of states, to maintain the need of a state to guarantee the safety of its inhabitants or its citizens without that being potentially undermined by other players. Thank you.
Julie, you seem to be ready.
I'm not sure I'm ready with an answer, but maybe ready to engage in that conversation and that question. And I agree with you. I think that's where we are now. We're embarking on having that conversation and really trying to understand where that power lies. And one of the things that we've been exploring is the use of data trusts, with the emphasis on trusts, where we really start to understand those roles and responsibilities, where the power lies, who owns what, who can use what for what purpose. So I think it's a conversation that we need to be having. It's even more important than it ever was before. I get your point about often industry leads the way because they may have deeper pockets, they may already be aligned themselves anyway. But I think there's a lot of change in those different industry business models. We as government and regulators also need to learn from industry as they're restructuring and reorganizing themselves. So I think we need to be in the conversation. And I think there are a number of tools and ways of thinking that are becoming available that we can now start to explore. But I'm not aware of anyone who's sort of implemented a full suite of how do we do this. But we're going forward, we've got the maybe traditional commercial models, all of that is in play. None of that has changed. But I think we've got even greater challenges than we ever had before. We just waste too much food. We just need to help feed a growing population. So we just have to do that, and we have to work together to get those imbalances out for all of our sakes, not each individual country.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on this point as well, because this is a discussion that we've been having for quite some time. So what's the role of the competent authority of the regulator? Are we going to abdicate this to industry? And how are we going to do this in the context of making sure that there's a sustainable food system going forward globally? So we recognize now, one of my jobs is to work on imported food safety, as many of you guys know, and the trend is just increasing in terms of where we source foods and where it comes from. That comes with a lot of benefits to consumers from a nutritional standpoint. It also comes with some challenges, food safety. But I think we've been saying at FDA for quite some time now, since the passage of our Food Safety Modernization Act 10 years ago, that we want to leverage reliable third-party audits. That doesn't mean that we're looking to abdicate our responsibility, but rather to make it additive. So what can we bring? Well, we have a primary responsibility to our consumers to ensure that we provide adequate oversight. But more than that, we can start to help drive, some consensus. And so I welcome the VTPA standards developed in Codex. I think this is a huge leap forward in this conversation. I think it starts to put a foundation underneath what's been happening out there in a business-to-business context that now we can leverage as regulators. So now today we're talking about the next step. What are the data that are generated? How can we use these data to ensure public confidence and public trust? The analytical tools that we have will help us in the future. So not only will it help us allocate our regulatory oversight resources, where do we go for inspections, sampling, what tools do we show up with, but it will also help to build confidence. And so, I think publishing those data as they're appropriate to demonstrate what I think we've known, and the foundation that's been laid, I think, by Codex and the VTPA will be helpful. How we get those data and then be able to share them, that's our challenge. And so we're looking at techniques like aggregation, de-identification, anonymization. There are techniques that will help us to be able to provide levels of confidentiality and still monitor trends in public health outcomes. And we need to be able to do that and also be able to share those, not only with our partners, but importantly with our consumers. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Bobby and then Ali, please.
I just want to give another dimension of data, and we kind of tuned to look at regulatory and compliance related data all the time. But what we also need to look at is the other side of digitalization, that's education and the opportunities it provides to people around the world to access the right information to increase their competencies. Go back 20 years, we were talking about capacity building exercises in countries where you have to be physically present to train people. And today we know with climate change and global data that's available regarding problems in different countries. Where did the flood occur? Where did we have a hurricane? Where did we have an earthquake? We already know what's going to happen next. So if we can come up with capacity building programs online with that data that we get from the disaster management system, so whatever the data is available internationally, we can also make sure that we can predict and kind of prevent the outbreaks that could happen, or also prevent the threats into the supply chains with that information. So I think digitalization should not be just looked at from a compliance angle. We need to look at every opportunity to use the data and information, especially on education and capacity building. And that also is really crucial, because we have a lot of countries that don't have the resources, but there are extremely talented people there who can contribute to developing technology, but they do not know how to contribute. And that's exactly why we should make food safety a bit trending in countries where it's not trending. And when I ask my son, sons, for instance, what do you want to become? They never talk about food safety, and not even public health for that matter. But they all want to work on data. So I can get my 12-year-old trending only if I talk to them about AI or digital tools. And so we need to kind of gamify the whole exercise by making data of food safety a bit trending. And that is what probably a bit of democratization would be, that will help us to take things forward, I think. Personal opinion.
So gamifying food safety, is that what I heard? Okay, we're inventing new words in here, so this is perfect. We have a new currency and we're gamifying new food safety as well. So thank you for that. Ali, please.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on what Marcus mentioned, because I think we had to come back to the VTPA discussion this morning. And I totally agree with him on the concerns that we also had in mind at the very beginning. And we still don't have really the convincing answers for this. But we were trying to look at other sectors, how they managed to use voluntary quality assurance schemes. And it looks like we're still trying to come up with some concrete examples, how the airlines industry or the pharmaceutical industry actually managed to use some private assurance schemes. And there was a trust. There was also some issues as well. So I think maybe in talking to our developing and middle and income and low income countries, maybe we can bring some examples from their own regions and own countries in other sectors that maybe convince them to look at this with an open mind. On the second point on the capacities in developing countries, that's something definitely is going to be the big challenge moving forward. But again, that's something I didn't mention in the morning. In the third pilot we started in the MENA region, we're exploring a regional approach to VTPA, and that's something new. So we're trying to see how we could, as a region, work together. Maybe the recognition assessment of VTPAs happens at regional level, and instead of each and every country have their own procedures, and then we have to worry about harmonizing their procedures and harmonizing the assessment skills. So we're exploring the possibility of a regional approach inspired by the regional approach of accreditation bodies, like when the IF trusted regions to carry their own regional accreditation assessments. We're still at the early stages doing this, and I think Steve and the colleagues were with us in these discussions lately, and maybe in the coming months we could propose a possible regional approach, which might address the issue of capacities and resources in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. There is an intervention here in the room as well, please.
Thank you very much for the presentations. Food safety is very broad. There's been a discussion about data. Can we break that down a little bit? What data are we referring to?
Sure. So colleagues or?
I think a whole lot of data sets, for instance, looking at a data that normally regulators look at is inspection data. What do our inspector mark as a contravention, like when they go into the facilities to inspect? So they were looking at violations that they notice against a particular license. So visiting a restaurant, you would find these are the problems that I found. That's the data. A product information, or what we call as a digital twin of the product through registration is the data. We look at certifications or documentations that are given through a system. So each of these certifications carry a lot of data or information about a product or a connected service, that this product has been approved for this. Laboratory information is a huge data set. So what product has been tested? What did you find? What you did not find? What you tested? What you did not test is a set of data. You could look at transactional data from businesses looking at, did I do my checks? So everything that you see on a record is actually a data source, provided it's in a digital format. So in most cases, when we look at a paper-based document in an aging food business, you can see that a lot of data is trapped in the paper, and that is all data opportunity. So anything that could be converted into a usable decision-making tool or a predictive tool would be considered as data in our context.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess actually this, your question, sir, practically helps us really to arrive at the wrap up of this session, because it's been a fascinating hour and a half discussing really the importance of food safety data and the importance also of the mechanisms to share it
the challenges also associated with that. It's going to be very hard for me to summarize what was said, but perhaps, you know, just mention a couple of key points. The fact that data is crucial in food safety systems and in food safety decision-making no longer requires demonstration. And a number of illustrations were made for the usability, whether be it for real-time decision-making or for longer-term review, predictability of the systems and further planning, aiming for better effectiveness. There are a number of prerequisites that were discussed, whether be it the legal framework, the policy changes that may be required, the creation of a favorable environment for data availability and data sharing, setting safeguards, but also creating really incentives for data to be shared. So essentially beyond what is required, trying to move beyond what is required to a more voluntary approach by creating further value proposition on the way data could be used by all stakeholders, not only by regulators, but also by food business operators. Various challenges were mentioned, the multiplicity of sources, the way data systems will be governed, the way they would be used, quality, of course, quality of data, interoperability, and also the availability of resources. Again, here there are a number of opportunities that might help address these. We know that technological solutions are becoming more and more available, cheaper, hopefully more accessible. We're looking, of course, at making sure that the approaches that are pursued do not increase the bridge between or the gap rather between developed jurisdictions and developing countries by putting the systems in place really to ensure, again, leveling that playing field. And here I go back to both Codex and technical assistance associated with Codex as one of the key vehicles. And I guess I'm going to leave a personal perspective, and I'm dating myself by doing so. Probably 15 years ago, we used to talk about private standards and the issues that private standards used to pose. Today, we're talking about VTPA and their application as pilots accessible to all and being implemented by various jurisdictions. And this was leveled through guidance provided by Codex and opportunities of collaboration between nations, supported by international organizations, and also guided by Codex standards. So here is really a good example of how we transform the challenge into an important opportunity moving food safety system forward. Again, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists, our speakers for their contribution, and thanking you all for your collaboration and your participation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for this very fruitful discussion. The second session is now over. So as we are getting to the end of our first day, I would like to welcome our dear colleague, Mr. Ali Badarnah, to the stage so that he does the concluding remarks of the first day of the Vienna Food Safety Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Nothing really a big deal, just to thank you all for being with us today and for all the speakers and moderators. Just a few points for tomorrow and for this evening. We kindly invite you for a reception at 4:30. We'll be in our restaurant, so the UNIDO colleagues will guide you through this. We planned for one of the colleagues planning to play music, so I hope it will work out. I cannot promise a lot. So see you at 4:30 in this reception. Second point, we're starting tomorrow at 10, but coffee break will be starting at 9 for those who would like to come and have maybe side meetings. So the coffee will be served outside at 9. The last point, because in the morning session, we didn't have the chance for some questions and answer with the participants, and we received some good number of questions from the online participants. We're putting all this together. We'll share it with the speakers and moderators so they can address, and then we will recirculate to all the participants so you know what kind of questions and answers that we missed during the morning. I think that's all from my side. Thank you so much and see you tomorrow. See you also still at the reception this evening. Thank you.